She traveled 1,000 miles to marry a stranger. But when Evelyn Hart stepped off that dusty train in the summer of 1883, no husband waited for her. Only a barefoot boy with hollow eyes and 7 words that would change her life forever. Pa's dead. Buried him yesterday. There's 7 of us now. What happened next is a story of survival, sacrifice, and a love that was never promised, but was always meant to be. Stay with me until the very end, and drop a comment telling me which city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. The train groaned to a stop at Sutter's Creek Station like a dying animal finally giving up its last breath. Steam hissed from beneath the iron wheels, rising into the late August air and disappearing into a sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. The sun hung merciless overhead, baking the wooden platform, the cracked earth, and every living thing unfortunate enough to stand beneath it. Evelyn Hart clutched her small leather traveling bag against her chest and stepped down from the railcar. Her boots, practical brown leather, worn but polished, touched the wooden planks of the platform, and for a moment she simply stood there, trying to steady herself after 3 days of relentless travel. She was 24 years old, unmarried, alone in a land she had never seen, waiting for a man she had never met. The platform was nearly empty. A few men loitered near the freight office, their eyes tracking her with lazy curiosity. A woman in a faded calico dress hurried past, clutching a basket of eggs. The station master, a heavy-set man with tobacco-stained teeth, barely glanced at her before disappearing back into his cramped office. Evelyn looked left, then right, then left again. No one was coming for her. She reached into her bag and pulled out the letter she had read so many times that the creases had worn thin and the ink had begun to fade. The handwriting was rough, unpracticed, but earnest. Dear Miss Hart, I am a widower with 7 children. My wife passed in childbirth this spring, and I find myself in need of help. I am not a wealthy man, but I own 40 acres of good land with water rights and a sturdy house. I'm looking for a woman of strong character who is willing to work hard and raise children as her own. If you're willing to come west, I will meet you at Sutter's Creek Station on August 29th. I will provide for you as best I can, and in time, I hope we may grow to care for one another. Yours respectfully, Thomas Miller. August 29th. Today. Evelyn folded the letter and slipped it back into her bag. She scanned the platform once more, searching for a man who might be Thomas Miller, a farmer, a father, a stranger who had promised her a new life. But there was no one. The minutes stretched. 5, 10, 15. The sun beat down without mercy. Sweat gathered at her temples and trickled down the back of her neck, soaking into the high collar of her traveling dress. The fabric, dark blue wool, appropriate for a bride meeting her husband for the first time, was completely wrong for this brutal heat. She had packed for respectability, not survival. 20 minutes passed. Evelyn's heart began to sink. Had he changed his mind? Had something gone wrong? Had she traveled all this way, sold everything she owned, left behind the only city she had ever known, only to be abandoned on a train platform in the middle of nowhere? She was about to approach the station master when she heard footsteps. Not the heavy boots of a grown man, something lighter, quicker. The slap of bare feet against wood. Evelyn turned. A boy stood at the edge of the platform. He was small, no more than 11 or 12, with sun-darkened skin and hair the color of wheat that had been left too long in the field. His clothes were filthy, a shirt with a torn collar, trousers held up by a length of rope, and no shoes. His feet were cracked and calloused, the feet of a child who had been walking barefoot through rough country for years. But it was his eyes that stopped her. They were old, far too old for a boy his age. They held something heavy, something that should never live in the eyes of a child. He looked at her, studied her, took in her fine dress, her leather bag, her proper Eastern appearance. Then he spoke. You Evelyn Hart? His voice was flat, tired, the voice of someone who had stopped expecting good things to happen. Evelyn straightened. I am. Do you know Thomas Miller? He was supposed to meet me here. The boy didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there staring at her with those ancient eyes. Pa's dead, he said. Buried him yesterday. The words hit her like a physical blow. She felt her knees weaken, felt the ground tilt slightly beneath her feet. "What?" she whispered. "Fever took him. 3 days ago. We buried him out by the big oak, next to Ma." Evelyn's hand went to her throat. Her mind raced, trying to process what she was hearing. Dead. Thomas Miller was dead. The man she had traveled 1,000 miles to marry, the man who had promised her a home, a family, a future, was lying in the ground. "I'm sorry," she managed. "I'm so sorry. I had no way of knowing. There's 7 of us now," the boy continued, as if she hadn't spoken. 7 kids. I'm the oldest. Name's Jonas." Evelyn stared at him. 7 children. 7 orphans. Left alone in this unforgiving land with no parents, no protection, no one to care for them. "Jonas," she said slowly, "where are your brothers and sisters now?" "At the house. I walked here to meet you. Pa said you were coming. Said you'd be on the train today. Figured someone ought to tell you what happened." He paused. "Figured you'd want to go back." Go back. The words hung in the air between them. Evelyn looked at the train still sitting on the tracks behind her. The conductor was making his final calls. In a few minutes it would pull away, heading east, back toward Boston, back toward the life she had left behind. She could go back. She had every right to go back. Thomas Miller was dead. The arrangement was void. No one would blame her for turning around and returning to civilization. But what about the children? "Jonas," Evelyn said quietly, "what will happen to you and your brothers and sisters if I leave?" The boy's jaw tightened. Something flickered in his eyes, fear maybe, or despair, before he forced it down. "We'll manage," he said. But his voice cracked on the last word. "Will you?" Jonas didn't answer. He just stood there, a small figure against the vast emptiness of the frontier, trying so hard to be brave, trying so hard to be the man his father could no longer be. And in that moment, Evelyn Hart made a decision that would change the course of her entire life. "Take me to them," she said. Jonas blinked. "What?" "Your brothers and sisters. Take me to them." But you don't have to. You didn't." "I know." Evelyn picked up her bag and stepped forward. "Take me to them anyway." The walk to the Miller farm took nearly an hour. The road, if it could be called a road, was little more than a dirt path carved through endless stretches of dry grassland. The heat was suffocating. Evelyn's dress clung to her skin, heavy with sweat, and her feet ached inside her boots. But she didn't complain. She just followed Jonas, step after step, through a landscape that seemed determined to break anyone foolish enough to challenge it. Jonas walked ahead of her, moving with the easy stride of someone who had spent his entire life on this land. He didn't talk, didn't look back, just kept walking, his bare feet somehow finding the smoothest path through the rocks and thorns. Evelyn watched him, studied the set of his thin shoulders, the way he held his head high despite everything. This boy had just lost his father. He was 11 years old and he was now responsible for 6 younger siblings. How was that possible? How could the world be so cruel? "Jonas," she said, breaking the silence, "how old are your brothers and sisters?" He answered without turning around. "Ruth's 9. She's been taking care of the little ones since Ma died. The twins, Peter and Paul, they're 7. Micah's 5. Sadie's 3. And Hope," his voice caught. "Hope's just a baby. Born the night Ma died." Evelyn's heart clenched. "And she's been without a mother this whole time?" "Ruth feeds her. Goat's milk when we have it. But Hope's been sick, real sick. She don't cry much anymore." A baby who didn't cry. Evelyn knew what that meant. Babies cried because they had the strength to demand attention. When they stopped crying, it meant they had given up. "How much further?" she asked. "Just over that rise." They crested a low hill, and Evelyn stopped. The Miller farm spread out before her in the afternoon light. 40 acres of parched land, brown and cracked from the summer drought. A few scraggly trees struggled to survive near a small creek bed that was more rock than water. In the distance, she could see the remains of what might once have been a vegetable garden, now just a patch of dead plants baking in the sun. And in the center of it all stood the house. if it could be called a house. It was a single-story structure, built from rough-hewn timber that had long since turned gray from exposure to the elements. The roof sagged in the middle. One window was broken, covered with a piece of canvas that flapped in the hot breeze. The front porch listed to one side, held up by makeshift supports that looked ready to collapse at any moment. This was not a home. This was a shelter, barely. Pa built it himself, Jonas said quietly. Before the twins were born. He always said he was going to fix it up proper, make it nice for Ma. But there was never enough time, never enough money. Evelyn nodded slowly. She didn't trust herself to speak. They approached the house. As they got closer, Evelyn noticed more details. The empty chicken coop, the broken fence that had once contained livestock, the well with its frayed rope and crooked handle. Everything spoke of struggle, of poverty, of a family fighting just to survive. Jonas climbed the creaking porch steps and pushed open the front door. "Ruth!" he called. "I brought her!" Evelyn stepped inside. The first thing that hit her was the heat. The house was like an oven, airless, stifling, oppressive. The second thing was the smell, unwashed bodies, spoiled milk, and something else, something sour and desperate. Her eyes adjusted to the dim light, and she saw them. 6 children, crowded into a single room. Ruth, a thin girl of 9 with her mother's eyes and her father's stubborn jaw, sat in a wooden chair, clutching a bundle of rags to her chest. The bundle moved, made a small, weak sound. The baby. Hope. The twins, Peter and Paul, stood in the corner, pressed against each other like they were trying to become one person. They had the same brown hair, the same wary expressions, the same way of watching Evelyn like she might be a threat. Micah, 5 years old, with a mop of unruly curls, sat on the floor, playing with a wooden toy horse that was missing a leg. He didn't look up when Evelyn entered, just kept moving the horse back and forth, lost in his own world. And Sadie, 3 years old, with a thumb planted firmly in her mouth, hid behind Ruth's chair, peering at Evelyn with enormous, frightened eyes. They were dirty. They were thin. They were terrified. And they were looking at Evelyn like she held their entire future in her hands. Ruth spoke first. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were red-rimmed from crying. "You're the mail-order bride," she said. It wasn't a question. "I was," Evelyn replied softly. "I came to marry your father." "He's dead." "I know, Jonas told me." Ruth's arms tightened around the baby. "So you're leaving then? Going back where you came from?" It was said matter-of-factly, without accusation, as if Ruth had already accepted that this was how the world worked. People left. People always left. Evelyn looked at the baby in Ruth's arms. Hope's face was pale, too pale. Her breathing was shallow and labored. Her tiny fists were clenched, but there was no strength in them. "How long has she been like this?" Evelyn asked. Ruth glanced down at her baby sister. "Few days. She stopped eating good about a week ago. Jonas went to town to fetch a doctor, but the doctor wanted $3 just to come out here, and we don't have—" Her voice broke. "We don't have anything." Evelyn set down her bag. Slowly, carefully, she approached Ruth and knelt beside the chair. "May I see her?" Ruth hesitated. Her grip on the baby tightened. But something in Evelyn's face must have reassured her, because after a long moment, she nodded. Evelyn reached out and gently touched Hope's forehead. The baby's skin was hot, too hot. Fever. Her little chest rose and fell in quick, shallow breaths. Her lips were dry and cracked. "She needs water," Evelyn said. "Cool water, and milk, if you have any." "The well's almost dry," Jonas said from the doorway. "And the goat stopped giving milk 2 days ago. We've been trying to feed Hope sugar water, but she won't take it." Evelyn's mind raced. A sick baby. No water, no milk, no doctor, and 7 children depending on her. She thought about the train. It was probably gone by now, but there would be another one in a few days. She could still leave. She could walk back to town, wait for the next eastbound train, and return to Boston. She could find work as a seamstress or a governess. She could rebuild her life. But if she left, what would happen to these children? The answer was obvious. They would die. Not all at once, perhaps, but slowly, one by one. The baby would go first, then maybe Sadie, then Micah. The land would take them, as it had taken their mother and father, unless someone stayed, unless someone fought. Evelyn stood up. She smoothed down her sweat-soaked dress and looked at the children, all 7 of them watching her with varying degrees of hope and fear and resignation. "My name is Evelyn Hart," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I came here to marry your father and help raise you. Your father is gone, but you are still here. And as long as you are here, I am not going anywhere." The twins exchanged a glance. Micah stopped moving his toy horse. Ruth's eyes widened. "You're staying?" Jonas asked, disbelief cracking through his careful composure. "But why? You don't owe us anything. You don't even know us." "No," Evelyn agreed. "I don't. But I know what it's like to be alone in the world. I know what it's like to have no one to turn to. And I made a promise, maybe not to your father directly, but to myself, that I was coming here to build a family. That hasn't changed." She picked up her bag and looked around the cramped, sweltering room. "Now," she said, "someone tell me where I can find clean water for this baby." The next few hours were a blur of activity. Jonas led Evelyn to the well, a pitiful thing, barely more than a hole in the ground with a rickety wooden frame around it. The rope was frayed, and the bucket had a crack in it, but there was still water at the bottom. Not much, but enough. Evelyn hauled up bucket after bucket, straining against the weight, her arms screaming in protest. She filled every container she could find, pots, pans, a cracked ceramic jug, even an old tin cup. Then she carried the water back to the house, where Ruth had laid Hope on a makeshift bed of folded blankets. "We need to cool her down," Evelyn said, dipping a clean rag into the water. "Gently, we don't want to shock her system." She pressed the cool cloth to Hope's forehead. The baby stirred, her tiny face scrunching up in discomfort, but she didn't cry. She didn't have the strength to cry. "Come on, little one," Evelyn whispered. "Come on. Stay with me." Ruth knelt beside her, watching every movement with intense concentration. "Is she going to die?" she asked quietly. Evelyn didn't answer right away. She wanted to lie. Wanted to say that everything would be fine, that Hope would recover, that there was nothing to worry about. But Ruth deserved better than lies. "I don't know," Evelyn said honestly. "But I'm going to do everything I can to make sure she doesn't." They worked through the evening, taking turns pressing cool cloths to Hope's fevered skin. Evelyn sent Jonas to check on the goat, a scrawny, ill-tempered animal that had been dry for days. But Jonas returned with a small amount of milk, barely a cupful, that he had somehow coaxed from the reluctant creature. "It's not much," he said, handing the cup to Evelyn. "It's enough." Evelyn mixed the milk with a little water and sugar, creating a thin, pale liquid that she hoped would be gentle enough for Hope's stomach. Using a clean rag, she dribbled the mixture into the baby's mouth, drop by drop. At first, nothing happened. The milk ran down Hope's chin, absorbed by the rags beneath her head. But then, a swallow. Weak, almost imperceptible, but definitely a swallow. "She took it," Ruth breathed. "Again," Evelyn said, slowly. They fed Hope one drop at a time, pausing between each to let her swallow, to let her rest. It took nearly an hour to get a few ounces into her, but by the time they finished, the baby's breathing seemed slightly easier, her skin slightly cooler. "We need to keep doing this through the night," Evelyn said. "Every hour, small amounts." "Can you help me?" Ruth nodded fiercely. "I'll do whatever you need." Evelyn looked at the other children. The twins had fallen asleep in the corner, curled together like puppies. Micah was stretched out on the floor, his toy horse still clutched in his hand. Sadie had climbed into Ruth's chair and was sucking her thumb, her eyes half closed. And Jonas stood in the doorway, watching Evelyn with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You should get some sleep," she told him. "Tomorrow's going to be a long day." "What are you going to do tomorrow?" "I'm going to town. We need supplies, food, medicine, milk. Real milk, not the few drops we're getting from that goat." "We don't have any money." Evelyn reached into her bag and pulled out a small leather pouch. Inside were coins, everything she had left in the world. "I have $12, she said. "It's not much, but it's enough to get us started." Jonas stared at the pouch. That's your money. You shouldn't spend it on us. It's our money now, Evelyn said firmly. We're a family, Jonas. That means we share everything, the work, the worry, and the money. For a long moment, Jonas didn't move, didn't speak. Then, slowly, something in his face changed. Some of the weight seemed to lift from his thin shoulders. Pa said you were a good woman, he said quietly. In his letter to you, the one he wrote before he got sick, he said he could tell from your words that you had a kind heart. Evelyn felt her throat tighten. I never got to meet him. I wish I had. He would have liked you. Jonas hesitated, then added, We all like you, even though we just met you. Before Evelyn could respond, Jonas turned and disappeared into the other room. She heard him settling onto what she assumed was his bed, probably just a pile of blankets on the floor. Ruth touched her arm. Miss Evelyn? Yes? Thank you. For staying. I thought... Ruth's voice wavered. I thought we were going to be alone forever. Evelyn put her arm around the girl's thin shoulders. You're not alone anymore, Ruth. I promise you that. But the night was long and grueling. Evelyn and Ruth took turns feeding Hope, waking every hour to dribble milk and water into the baby's mouth. The heat refused to break, and the house remained stifling despite the open windows. Mosquitoes and flies buzzed constantly, and somewhere in the distance, coyotes howled at the moon. But by dawn, something miraculous had happened. Hope was still alive. Not just alive, better. Her fever had broken sometime in the early morning hours, and her breathing had steadied. When Evelyn lifted her from the blankets, the baby opened her eyes, really opened them, and looked at Evelyn with something that might have been curiosity. She's looking at you, Ruth said, wonder in her voice. Hello, little Hope, Evelyn whispered. Nice to finally meet you. The baby made a small sound, not quite a cry, but close, a sign of life, a sign of fight. Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back, refusing to let them fall. There would be time for crying later, or maybe there wouldn't be. Right now, there was too much work to do. She handed Hope to Ruth and stood up, stretching her aching back. I'm going to town, she announced. Jonas, I need you to stay here and help Ruth with the children. Can you do that? Jonas nodded. Yes, ma'am. Good. I'll be back by midday with supplies. In the meantime, try to keep everyone cool. Use the water from the well sparingly, just enough to drink and to keep Hope comfortable. She picked up her bag, lighter now without the $12, and headed for the door. Miss Evelyn? Jonas called. She turned. Yes? Be careful in town. There's a man there, Hollis Brigg. He owns most of the land around here. He's been trying to buy Pa's farm for years. Now that Pa's gone, Jonas hesitated. Just be careful. Evelyn nodded slowly. Thank you for the warning, Jonas. I'll keep my eyes open. The walk to Sutter's Creek took almost 2 hours under the morning sun. By the time Evelyn reached the outskirts of town, her dress was soaked through with sweat and her feet were blistered inside her boots. But she kept walking, one step after another, because that was all she could do. Sutter's Creek was a small town, barely more than a main street lined with wooden buildings. There was a general store, a blacksmith shop, a saloon, a church, and a handful of other establishments that catered to the farmers and ranchers who lived in the surrounding countryside. Evelyn made her way to the general store first. The proprietor, a grizzled man with a bushy gray beard and suspicious eyes, watched her approach with undisguised curiosity. Help you, miss? I need supplies, Evelyn said, stepping inside. The store was dim and crowded, packed with barrels and crates and shelves full of goods. Milk, if you have it. Flour, sugar, salt. Any medicine for a sick baby. The proprietor grunted. Got milk, fresh this morning. Flour's 3 cents a pound, sugar's 6. Medicine. He shrugged. Got some patent medicines on that shelf there, but for a sick baby, you'd want Dr. Hartley. He's got an office 2 doors down. How much for a house call? $3. Evelyn had $12. 3 for the doctor would leave her with 9. Barely enough to feed 7 children for a week. I'll take the milk and the flour for now, she said, and whatever that 3 cents will get me in sugar. She made her purchases, carefully counting out the coins, and packed everything into a canvas sack the proprietor sold her for an extra nickel. Then she headed for the doctor's office. Dr. Hartley was a thin, nervous-looking man with wire-rimmed spectacles and ink-stained fingers. He listened as Evelyn described Hope's symptoms, the fever, the labored breathing, the refusal to eat, and nodded thoughtfully. "Sounds like a digestive complaint," he said. "Common in infants, especially when they're not getting proper nourishment. You said the mother died in childbirth?" "Yes. The baby's been fed goat's milk, but the goat went dry." Dr. Hartley stroked his chin. "Goat's milk is adequate, but cow's milk is better, properly diluted. The fever could be from infection or simply from dehydration. You say she's improving?" "She took some milk this morning. Her fever broke." "Then you may be past the worst of it. Keep her hydrated, keep her cool, and try to get her eating regularly. Small amounts, frequently. And if the fever returns or she stops eating again, bring her to me immediately." Evelyn nodded. "Thank you, doctor." She was about to leave when Dr. Hartley spoke again. "You're the mail-order bride, aren't you? The one Thomas Miller sent for." Evelyn turned. "I was. He died before I arrived." "I know. I was the one who signed the death certificate." The doctor's expression softened. "Fever, like I said, came on fast and hit him hard. He was delirious at the end, but he kept talking about you, about the woman who was coming to save his children." He paused. "You're still here. Most women in your position would have turned around and gone home." "Those children need someone," Evelyn said simply. "I couldn't leave them." Dr. Hartley studied her for a long moment. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small glass vial. "Peppermint oil," he said, pressing it into her hand. "Mix a few drops with water and give it to the baby when she's fussy. It'll help settle her stomach. No charge." Evelyn's eyes widened. "Doctor, I can't." "You can, and you will." Dr. Hartley smiled, a thin, tired smile, but genuine. "Thomas Miller was a good man. He deserved better than what life gave him. If you're willing to take care of his children, the least I can do is help where I can." Evelyn felt her throat tighten. "Thank you." She left the doctor's office and stepped back onto the main street, blinking in the sudden brightness of the sun. And that was when she saw him. He was a large man, tall and broad, with a gut that strained against his expensive vest, and a face that looked like it had been carved from red stone. He wore a black hat and carried a silver-handled cane, and he moved through the street like he owned it, which, Evelyn would later learn, he essentially did. He stopped directly in front of her, blocking her path. "Well, well," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You must be the bride." Evelyn straightened. "I'm Evelyn Hart. Hollis Brigg." He didn't offer his hand, just looked at her with cold, calculating eyes. "I heard you decided to stay at the Miller place. Bold choice for a woman alone." "I'm not alone. There are 7 children who need me." Brigg laughed, a harsh, unpleasant sound. "Children. Right. You know what's going to happen to those children, don't you? Without Thomas Miller, there's no one to work that land, no one to pay the debts he owed. And he owed quite a bit, Miss Hart. To me." Evelyn felt a chill despite the heat. "What kind of debts?" "The kind that come due." Brigg leaned closer, close enough that she could smell the tobacco on his breath. "Thomas Miller borrowed $200 from me 3 years ago, promised to pay it back with interest. He never did. Now he's dead, and that debt falls to his estate, which, as far as I can tell, consists of 40 acres of dried-up farmland and 7 hungry mouths." Evelyn's heart hammered in her chest. $200. It might as well have been 2,000. She had 9 now, after her purchases. "What are you saying, Mr. Brigg?" "I'm saying that come spring, if that debt isn't paid, I'll be taking possession of that land. And those children?" He shrugged. "They'll go to the county orphanage in Cedar Falls, 60 miles from here. Nice place, I hear. Very institutional." Evelyn stared at him. "You would throw 7 children out of their home?" "It won't be their home anymore. It'll be my property. I've got water rights to think about, Miss Hart. That creek running through the Miller land, it feeds into my cattle operation. I need that water." He smiled, showing teeth stained yellow from tobacco. "Business is business." For a long moment, Evelyn didn't speak. She was trembling, with fear, with rage, with a fury she had never felt before in her life. Then she found her voice. "Mr. Brigg," she said, each word clear and precise, "I don't know how we're going to pay your debt, but I will find a way. And those children, Thomas Miller's children, they are not going anywhere. That land is their home, and it will remain their home. Do you understand me?" Brigg's smile faded. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise maybe, or grudging respect. "Big words," he said. "We'll see if you can back them up. You've got until spring, Miss Hart. First thaw. I'll be coming to collect, one way or another." He tipped his hat, a mocking theatrical gesture, and walked past her, disappearing into the saloon. Evelyn stood in the middle of the street, clutching her canvas sack, her mind racing. $200. By spring. To save a farm and 7 children. It was impossible. But then again, so was everything else she had done in the last 24 hours. She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and began the long walk back to the Miller farm. When she arrived, the children were waiting for her on the porch. Jonas spotted her first. He jumped to his feet and ran to meet her, taking the heavy sack from her arms without being asked. "You came back," he said, and there was something in his voice, relief, maybe, or wonder. "I told you I would." They went inside together. Ruth was sitting in her usual chair, Hope cradled in her arms. The baby was awake, her dark eyes tracking movement around the room. "She's been like this all morning," Ruth said. "Awake, looking at things. She even tried to grab my finger." Evelyn knelt beside them and looked at Hope. Really looked at her. The baby's color was better. Her breathing was steady. She was still too thin, still too fragile, but there was life in her eyes now. Fight. "She's a strong one," Evelyn said. "Just like her mother must have been. Just like all of you." She stood and turned to face the children, all 7 of them, gathered in the cramped front room of this broken-down house. "I want to tell you something," she said. "All of you. About what's going to happen next." The twins exchanged nervous glances. Micah looked up from his toy horse. Sadie sucked her thumb harder. "There's a man in town," Evelyn continued. "His name is Hollis Brigg. He says your father owed him money, $200. He says if we don't pay by spring, he's going to take the farm." Jonas's face went pale. "Take the farm? But this is our home. Pa built this house. Ma's buried here. We're not going to lose it," Evelyn said firmly. "I don't know how yet, but I am going to find a way to pay that debt. We're going to keep this land, and we are going to stay together as a family, all of us." Silence fell over the room. The children looked at her, this stranger who had walked into their lives barely a day ago, and Evelyn saw the same thing in all of their faces. Hope. Small and fragile and uncertain, but real. For the first time since their father died, they had hope. "Miss Evelyn?" Ruth asked quietly. "Yes?" Are we really a family now?" Evelyn smiled, her first real smile since stepping off that train. "Yes, Ruth. We really are." She looked around the cramped, sweltering room, at the 7 children who had just become her responsibility, at the crumbling house that had just become her home, at the impossible task that lay ahead of her. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the fear and exhaustion and uncertainty, she felt something stir. Not just determination, not just stubbornness, something more. It felt like the beginning of something, a story that was just getting started, a family that was being born from the ashes of tragedy. Evelyn Hart had come west to marry a stranger. Instead, she had found something far more precious. She had found a reason to stay. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of work and worry. Evelyn threw herself into the task of keeping the family alive. She cooked what little food they had, stretching meals further than seemed possible. She mended clothes that were more patches than fabric. She hauled water from the nearly dry well, counted every drop like it was gold, and prayed for rain that never came. But it wasn't just physical labor. It was emotional labor, too. The children were grieving, each one in their own way, at their own pace. Jonas tried to act like nothing had changed, throwing himself into chores, working from dawn to dusk, refusing to talk about his feelings. But Evelyn saw him sometimes, standing alone by the big oak tree where his parents were buried, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Ruth clung to responsibility like a lifeline. She insisted on caring for Hope, on watching the younger children, on proving herself useful. But at night, when she thought no one was watching, she would curl up in a corner and cry. The twins, Peter and Paul, barely spoke. They communicated in glances and gestures, a private language that only they understood. They were terrified, Evelyn realized, of being separated. They had heard stories about orphanages where siblings were split up, never to see each other again. Micah retreated into his own world. He played endlessly with his broken toy horse, creating elaborate adventures that took place entirely in his imagination. It was his way of escaping, Evelyn understood, his way of coping with a reality too painful to face. And Sadie, poor little Sadie, simply clung. To Ruth, to Jonas, to Evelyn. To anyone who would hold her and tell her that everything was going to be okay. Evelyn held her often, held all of them when they would let her. "It's going to be okay," she whispered, night after night. "We're going to make it through this. Together." She didn't know if it was true, but she said it anyway, because sometimes hope is the only thing that keeps you going. One evening, about a week after Evelyn's arrival, Jonas came to her with a question. "Miss Evelyn, can I ask you something?" They were sitting on the front porch watching the sun set over the dry fields. The other children were inside, supposedly getting ready for bed, though Evelyn could hear them whispering and giggling through the thin walls. "Of course, Jonas, you can ask me anything." He was quiet for a moment, picking at a splinter on the porch railing. "Why did you come here?" he finally asked. "For real, I mean. Pa said you were a seamstress in Boston, said you had work, had a life there. Why would you leave all that to marry a stranger you never met?" Evelyn considered the question carefully. It deserved an honest answer. "Because I was lonely," she said. "I had work, yes, a small room in a boarding house, enough money to survive, but I didn't have a family. I didn't have anyone who needed me or anyone I needed." She paused. "When I saw your father's advertisement in the newspaper, a widower with 7 children looking for a woman of strong character, I thought, maybe this is my chance. Maybe this is where I'm supposed to be." Jonas looked at her. "And now? Now that Pa's dead? Do you still think this is where you're supposed to be?" Evelyn smiled. "More than ever." "Why?" "Because of you." She gestured at the house, at the land, at the sky turning orange and pink above them. "All of you, your brothers and sisters, this family. You need someone, Jonas, and I—" Her voice caught. "I need someone too. I need to be needed. Does that make sense?" Jonas nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said. "It does." They sat in silence for a while, watching the last light fade from the sky. Then Jonas spoke again. "Miss Evelyn?" "Yes?" "I'm glad you stayed." Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes. She reached out and put her hand on Jonas's shoulder, thin and bony beneath his worn shirt. "So am I, Jonas. So am I." The days turned into weeks. The summer heat began to fade, replaced by the cooler winds of autumn. And slowly, gradually, life on the Miller farm began to find a rhythm. Hope continued to improve. The peppermint oil Dr. Hartley had given Evelyn worked wonders for the baby's digestion, and regular feedings of diluted cow's milk, purchased at great expense from a neighbor's farm, helped her gain weight. By the end of September, she was a chubby, bright-eyed infant who smiled when Evelyn held her and reached for Ruth's face with tiny, grasping hands. The other children adjusted too. Peter and Paul began to emerge from their shell, cautiously at first, then with growing confidence. Micah started talking more, telling stories about his imaginary adventures with his toy horse. Sadie stopped sucking her thumb, at least during the day, and Ruth was transformed. With Evelyn to share the burden of caring for the younger children, she was finally free to be a child herself. She learned to laugh again, to play, to enjoy the simple pleasures of running through the fields and climbing trees and making up silly songs with her brothers. Jonas remained serious, that was his nature, but even he began to soften. He smiled more, talked more, and sometimes when he thought no one was looking, he would watch Evelyn with an expression that looked almost like gratitude. But the debt remained. $200, due by spring. Evelyn had managed to earn a few dollars here and there, sewing for neighbors, mending clothes for the farmers' wives in town, doing odd jobs whenever they were offered. But it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. At night, after the children were asleep, she would sit at the kitchen table and count their money. $6, $8, $12. Never more than that. Never anywhere close to what they needed. And always in the back of her mind, she heard Hollis Briggs' voice. "You've got until spring, Miss Hart. First thaw. I'll be coming to collect." Evelyn didn't know how she was going to save the farm. She didn't know how she was going to protect these children from a man with money and power and the law on his side. But she knew one thing. She wasn't going to give up. Not now. Not ever. These children had already lost too much. They weren't going to lose their home too. Not while Evelyn Hart was still breathing. Marmot. October brought the first hints of winter. The leaves on the scrub oaks turned brown and fell, littering the dusty ground. The nights grew cold, and Evelyn spent long hours patching holes in the walls and stuffing rags into cracks to keep out the wind. One evening, while searching through Thomas Miller's belongings for anything useful, she found something unexpected. A letter. Hidden in the bottom of an old trunk, tucked beneath a pile of moth-eaten blankets. The handwriting was different from Thomas's, bolder, more confident, and the return address. W. Miller. Somewhere in Montana. No fixed address. Evelyn opened the letter with trembling hands. Dear Thomas, I know it's been years since we spoke. I know you probably haven't forgiven me for what happened, but I heard about Mary's death, and I wanted to say I'm sorry. I know I should have come to the funeral. I know I should have been there for you and the children, but I couldn't. I wasn't ready. I'm still not ready. But I want you to know that I'm out here, thinking about you, thinking about the family. If you ever need anything, really need something, you can write to me at the address on this envelope. I can't promise I'll come, but I'll try. I'm sorry, Thomas, for everything. Your brother, Wyatt. Evelyn stared at the letter. Wyatt Miller, Thomas's brother. A man the children barely remembered, who had disappeared years ago after some kind of violent incident. She didn't know what had happened between the brothers. She didn't know why Wyatt had left, or where he was now, or if he was even still alive. But she knew one thing. With nothing left to lose, it was worth a try. That night, by the light of a single candle, Evelyn Hart sat down to write a letter to a man she had never met, begging him to come home. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, a prayer thrown into the void. But sometimes prayers are answered, and sometimes the people we need most are the ones we least expect. Evelyn sealed the letter and addressed it carefully. In the morning, she would take it to town and send it. She looked at the sleeping children, Jonas and Ruth and the twins, Micah and Sadie and little Hope, and felt her heart swell with a love she hadn't known she was capable of. These were her children now, maybe not by blood, but by choice, and she would fight for them with everything she had. The road ahead was long and uncertain. The challenges were enormous. The odds were stacked against them. But Evelyn Hart was not a woman who backed down from a fight. She had walked into an empty yard expecting a husband. Instead, she had found a family. And that family was worth everything. The letter to Wyatt Miller left Sutter's Creek on a Tuesday morning, carried by a mail coach heading north toward Montana Territory. Evelyn watched it go, standing at the edge of the wooden boardwalk with her shawl wrapped tight against the autumn chill, and wondered if she had just wasted her last hope on a man who might never read it. The postmaster had warned her that mail to the territories was unreliable at best. Letters got lost. Coaches were robbed. Whole bags of correspondence simply vanished into the vast emptiness of the frontier, never to be seen again. But what choice did she have? She turned away from the departing coach and began the long walk back to the farm, her boots crunching on the frost-hardened road. October had settled over the valley like a cold hand, stripping the last leaves from the trees and turning the sky a flat iron gray. Winter was coming. She could feel it in her bones, in the ache of her joints and the tightness in her chest when she breathed the frigid morning air. Winter was coming, and they were not ready. The thought gnawed at her as she walked, mile after mile, past fields that had yielded nothing and orchards that stood bare and skeletal against the pale sky. The Miller farm had produced almost no harvest this year. The drought had seen to that. What little corn Thomas Miller had managed to plant before his death had withered in the summer heat, and the vegetable garden, already neglected after Mary's death in childbirth, had become nothing more than a patch of dried weeds and cracked earth. There was no food stored for winter. No preserved vegetables, no salted meat, no flour in the pantry. The few chickens that had once scratched in the yard were gone, sold or eaten months ago. The goat was producing barely enough milk for Hope, and even that was growing thinner as the animal's own nutrition declined. How was she supposed to feed 7 children through the winter? The question had no answer, or rather, it had an answer that Evelyn refused to accept. She could give up. She could take the children to the orphanage in Cedar Falls and walk away from this impossible situation. She could return to Boston, find work as a seamstress, and pretend that none of this had ever happened. But every time that thought crossed her mind, she saw their faces. Jonas with his 2 old eyes, Ruth with her fierce determination, the twins clinging to each other. Micah lost in his imaginary world, Sadie with her thumb in her mouth, and Hope, little Hope, finally healthy, finally thriving, finally looking at the world with curiosity instead of the blank stare of a dying infant. She couldn't abandon them. She wouldn't. So she kept walking. When Evelyn finally reached the farm, the sun was already beginning its descent toward the western hills. The house looked even more decrepit in the fading light. The sagging roof, the crooked porch, the gaps in the walls where the wind whistled through. Smoke rose from the chimney, thin and pale, and she felt a small measure of relief. At least they had managed to keep the fire going. Jonas was waiting for her on the porch, his thin frame silhouetted against the doorway. "Did you send it?" he asked as she approached. "The letter?" Evelyn nodded, climbing the creaking steps. "It's on its way to Montana. If it gets there, if he's still at that address, if he's even alive. That's a lot of ifs." "I know." She paused beside him, looking out at the dying light. "But it's all we've got, Jonas, unless you have a better idea." The boy was silent for a moment. Then he shook his head slowly. "No, ma'am, I don't." They stood together in the gathering dusk, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled and another answered, their voices rising and falling in an ancient, mournful chorus. "Miss Evelyn?" Jonas asked quietly. "Yes?" "What if he doesn't come? What if the letter gets lost, or he tears it up without reading it, or he just doesn't care? What do we do then?" Evelyn turned to look at him. In the dim light, she could barely make out his features, but she could hear the fear in his voice, the desperation he was trying so hard to hide. "Then we find another way," she said firmly. "There's always another way, Jonas. We just have to be willing to look for it. But what if there isn't? There is." She put her hand on his shoulder, feeling the sharp bones beneath his worn shirt. "I don't know what it is yet, but I will find it. I promise you that." Jonas didn't respond. He just stood there, his body rigid with tension, and Evelyn wondered how long he had been carrying this weight alone. How many nights had he lain awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out how to save his family? How many mornings had he risen before dawn to work the fields, knowing that it was pointless, knowing that the drought had already killed everything? He was 11 years old. He should have been playing in the creek, climbing trees, getting into mischief with other boys his age. Instead, he was trying to be a man, trying to fill the void his father had left behind. It wasn't fair. None of this was fair, but fairness was a luxury they couldn't afford. "Come inside," Evelyn said gently. "It's getting cold, and I need to start supper." Jonas nodded and followed her into the house. The next few weeks were the hardest Evelyn had ever faced. Food became an obsession, finding it, stretching it, making it last. She learned to cook things she had never imagined eating, dandelion greens foraged from the edges of the property, acorn flour ground from nuts collected in the sparse woods nearby, thin soups made from bones she begged from the butcher in town. Every meal was a careful calculation, every portion measured to ensure that the children got enough while she made do with less. The children noticed. Of course they noticed. "Miss Evelyn, you didn't eat anything," Ruth said one evening, watching as Evelyn cleared away the empty bowls from supper. Again. "I ate earlier. Evelyn lied, keeping her voice light. I had some bread while I was cooking. Ruth's eyes narrowed. She was too smart, this one, too observant. No, you didn't. I was in the kitchen the whole time, helping with Hope. You didn't eat anything. Evelyn sighed and set down the bowls. Ruth, listen to me. There's only so much food. If I eat a full portion, that's less for you and your brothers and sisters. I'm a grown woman. I can go without. You children are still growing. But you're getting thin. Ruth's voice trembled slightly. I can see your bones. Your cheeks are all hollow and your dresses don't fit right anymore. Evelyn felt her heart constrict. She knelt down so that she was at eye level with the 9-year-old and took both of Ruth's hands in hers. Ruth, look at me. I am fine. A little hungry, yes, but fine. And things are going to get better. I'm sewing for Mrs. Patterson next week. She's paying me 50 cents for a new dress for her daughter. And Mr. Hartley at the general store said he might have some work for me too, sorting stock in the back room. We just need to hold on a little longer. Ruth bit her lip. Promise? Promise. But even as Evelyn said the words, she wasn't sure she believed them. The sewing work came through as she had hoped, Mrs. Patterson was a rancher's wife who lived about 3 miles east of the Miller farm, a stout woman with iron gray hair and a voice that could carry across a cattle yard. She had heard about Evelyn from the general store proprietor, the brave young woman who had stayed to raise a dead man's children, and had come to investigate for herself. You can sew, you say? Mrs. Patterson had asked, looking Evelyn up and down with a critical eye. Real sewing? Not just patching and darning? I trained as a seamstress in Boston, Evelyn replied. I can do fine work. Embroidery, tailoring, dressmaking, whatever you need. Mrs. Patterson had grunted, a sound that could have meant anything, and then nodded. My daughter's getting married come spring. She needs a wedding dress. Nothing too fancy, mind you, but respectable. Can you do it? Evelyn's heart leaped. A wedding dress would mean weeks of work, weeks of income. Yes, ma'am, I can do it. Good. I'll bring the fabric next week. You do good work, and I'll tell the other ladies in the valley. Lord knows we could use a proper seamstress around here. True to her word, Mrs. Patterson had arrived 7 days later with bolts of white cotton and yards of delicate lace. She had also brought something else, 2 pounds of flour, a bag of dried beans, and a small crock of bacon fat. Call it a down payment, she said, her gruff voice softening just slightly. I heard about the trouble you're in, the brig business. That man's a snake, and everyone around here knows it. If there's anything we can do to help. She had trailed off, leaving the offer hanging in the air. Evelyn had thanked her profusely, blinking back tears, and set to work on the dress that same evening. It was delicate work, requiring steady hands and sharp eyes, and Evelyn found herself staying up long after the children had gone to bed, stitching by candlelight until her fingers cramped and her vision blurred. But with every completed seam, every perfect stitch, she felt a small sense of accomplishment. She was doing something, contributing something, fighting back against the tide of poverty and despair that threatened to drown them all. The dress took 3 weeks to complete. When Mrs. Patterson saw it, her stern face broke into a rare smile. Well, I'll be, she said, running her rough fingers over the delicate embroidery. This is fine work, Miss Hart, as fine as anything you'd see in San Francisco or St. Louis. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. Here, $2, as we agreed, and a little extra for the quality. Evelyn opened the pouch and counted the coins. $2.50. A fortune. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you so much. Mrs. Patterson waved a dismissive hand. You earned it, and like I said, I'll spread the word. There are plenty of ladies in this valley who'd pay good money for sewing this fine. She was true to her word. Over the following weeks, other women began appearing at the Miller farm, bringing fabric and clothing and requests. A hem to be taken up, a coat to be patched, a Sunday dress that needed letting out. The work was steady, if not lucrative, and Evelyn threw herself into it with desperate energy. But it wasn't enough. It was never enough. The debt to Hollis Brig hung over them like a thundercloud, growing larger and more menacing with each passing day. $200, an impossible sum. At the rate Evelyn was earning, it would take years to accumulate that much money, and they didn't have years. They had until spring, until the first thaw, until Brig came to collect. Evelyn tried not to think about it, tried to focus on the day-to-day tasks of survival, keeping the children fed, keeping the house warm, keeping everyone healthy through the increasingly harsh weather. But at night, when she lay alone in her narrow bed, listening to the wind howl outside the thin walls, the fear crept in. What if she failed? What if, despite everything she did, everything she sacrificed, it wasn't enough? What would happen to the children then? She knew the answer. The orphanage in Cedar Falls. A gray institutional building filled with abandoned children and overworked staff. The twins would be separated, boys in one wing, girls in another. Hope would be taken away, placed with a family who might or might not treat her well. Jonas and Ruth would age out in a few years, turned loose into the world with nothing but the clothes on their backs and whatever skills they had managed to learn. It was a fate worse than death. At least, that's how Evelyn saw it, and she would do anything to prevent it. November brought the first snow. It came softly at first, delicate flakes drifting down from a white sky, dusting the fields and the rooftops with a thin layer of white. The children were enchanted. Even Jonas, who tried so hard to be serious, couldn't help but grin as he watched his younger siblings romping in the fresh powder. "I've never seen so much snow," Sadie squealed, her cheeks red with cold and excitement. "It's like the whole world is covered in sugar." "It's not sugar, dummy," Peter said, but his voice was kind. "It's frozen water." "I know that," Sadie replied indignantly. "I'm not a baby." Evelyn watched them from the porch, a thin smile on her lips. For a moment, just a moment, she could almost believe that everything was going to be all right, that they were just an ordinary family enjoying an ordinary winter day with nothing to worry about but snowball fights and hot cocoa. But the moment passed, as moments always do. The snow kept falling. What had started as a gentle dusting became a steady accumulation, and by nightfall, the drifts were knee-deep in places. The temperature plummeted, turning the farmhouse into an icebox despite the fire blazing in the hearth. Wind screamed through the gaps in the walls, and the children huddled together under every blanket they owned, their breath forming white clouds in the frigid air. "We need more firewood," Jonas said, his teeth chattering. "I'll go chop some." "Not in this weather," Evelyn replied. "You'll freeze to death before you reach the woodpile. We'll make do with what we have tonight. Tomorrow, when the storm passes, we'll gather more." But the storm didn't pass. It raged for 3 days, dumping snow on the valley until the drifts were higher than Evelyn's head in places. The woodpile ran low, then lower, until they were burning the last few logs and wondering what they would do when those were gone. On the third night, with the fire reduced to glowing embers and the cold seeping into their bones, Evelyn made a decision. "Jonas," she said quietly, pulling the boy aside, "I need you to stay here and watch the children. Keep everyone together, under the blankets, body heat shared. Do you understand?" Jonas's eyes widened. "Where are you going?" "To find more wood. There are fallen branches in the woods near the creek. I saw them last week." "But Miss Evelyn, the snow—" "I'll be careful." She pulled on her heaviest coat, still pitifully thin for this weather, and wrapped a scarf around her face. "Keep the fire going as long as you can. I'll be back soon." She didn't give him a chance to argue. She pushed open the door, fighting against the wind that tried to slam it shut, and stepped out into the howling darkness. The cold hit her like a physical blow. It stole her breath, froze her nostrils, sent sharp needles of pain stabbing into every exposed inch of skin. The snow was up to her waist in places, and each step was a battle against the drifts that threatened to swallow her whole. But she kept going. One foot in front of the other, one step at a time. The woods seemed impossibly far away. She lost track of time, lost track of direction, lost track of everything except the simple imperative to keep moving. Her fingers went numb first, then her toes, then her face. The world narrowed to a tunnel of white, swirling chaos, and somewhere in the back of her mind a voice whispered that she was going to die out here, alone in the snow, while 7 children waited for a rescue that would never come. But she didn't die. Somehow, she would never know how, she found the fallen branches. A massive oak had toppled during the storm, its trunk split by lightning, its limbs scattered across the frozen ground. She grabbed as many as she could carry, stumbling under their weight, and began the long trek back to the house. The return journey was even harder than the outward one. Her strength was failing, sapped by cold and exhaustion and hunger. Several times she stumbled and fell, face first into the snow, and had to force herself back to her feet through sheer willpower. The branches felt like lead in her arms, dragging her down, but she refused to drop them. If she dropped them, the children would freeze. If the children froze, everything she had fought for would be meaningless. So she kept going. And finally, after what felt like hours, she saw it. A faint glow in the distance. The farmhouse. The window, lit by the dying embers of the fire. She staggered up the porch steps, crashed through the door, and collapsed on the floor, the branches scattering around her. "Miss Evelyn!" Jonas's voice, sharp with fear. Then hands, small hands, children's hands, pulling at her coat, dragging her toward the fire. "She's frozen! Ruth, get more blankets! Peter, Paul, help me with the wood!" Evelyn tried to speak, tried to tell them she was all right, but her jaw was locked, her teeth chattering so violently she couldn't form words. She felt blankets piling on top of her, felt small bodies pressing against her, sharing their warmth. And slowly, gradually, the ice began to melt from her bones. "You stupid, stupid woman," Jonas whispered, and there were tears in his voice. "You could have died. You could have left us all alone. Couldn't," Evelyn managed, her voice a hoarse rasp. "Couldn't let you freeze. We would have been fine. We would have figured something out." "No." She forced her eyes open, looked up at the boy kneeling beside her. "You're children. You shouldn't have to figure anything out. That's my job now." Jonas stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly, he reached out and took her frozen hand in both of his. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for staying, for fighting, for not giving up on us." Evelyn squeezed his hand, what little strength she had left. "I will never give up on you, any of you. I promise." The storm broke the following morning, leaving behind a world transformed by snow. The sun emerged from behind the clouds, brilliant and blinding, and the children poured out of the house to play in the drifts, while Evelyn recovered by the fire. She had survived. They all had. But she knew, with cold certainty, that this was only the beginning. The winter was long, and spring was far away, and somewhere out there, Hollis Brigg was waiting. The weeks that followed tested Evelyn in ways she hadn't thought possible. The snow stayed, packing down into ice, making every trip to town an exhausting ordeal. The well froze solid, forcing them to melt snow for water. The goat stopped producing milk entirely, and little Hope had to be fed increasingly thin gruel that barely kept her alive. But they survived. Day by day, meal by meal, they survived. Evelyn's sewing work continued, though it slowed during the worst of the winter. She took on whatever job she could find, mending, washing, cleaning. She worked for the general store sorting inventory in the back room for pennies an hour. She helped Mrs. Patterson with cooking during a holiday gathering, coming home with leftover ham and biscuits that fed the children for 3 days. Every cent she earned went into a jar she kept hidden beneath a loose floorboard. Every week she counted the money, watching the total inch upward with agonizing slowness. $20, $30, $40. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But she kept trying, and slowly, something began to change within the walls of that broken-down farmhouse. Something that had nothing to do with money or survival. Trust. It started with Ruth. The 9-year-old had been watching Evelyn closely since her arrival, studying her every move with the wary eyes of a child who had learned that adults couldn't be relied upon. But after the night in the snowstorm, after Evelyn had risked her life to bring back firewood, something shifted. "Miss Evelyn?" Ruth asked one evening as they sat together by the fire. Hope was asleep in Ruth's arms, and the other children were playing quietly in the corner. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." Ruth hesitated, chewing her lower lip. "My mama, before she died, she used to sing to us. At night, when we couldn't sleep. She had a beautiful voice." She paused. "Do you know any songs?" Evelyn smiled softly. "I know a few. Would you like me to sing one?" Ruth nodded, her eyes bright with hope. So Evelyn sang, an old lullaby her own mother had sung to her years ago before consumption had taken her away. Her voice was thin and unpracticed, nothing like the trained singers she had heard in Boston concert halls, But it didn't matter. The children gathered around, drawn by the sound, and by the time she finished, even Jonas had emerged from his corner to listen. "That was beautiful," Ruth whispered. "Sing another one," Sadie demanded, crawling into Evelyn's lap. "Please?" So she sang another, and another, and when her voice finally gave out, the children begged her to tell stories instead, and she obliged, spinning tales from memory and imagination until the fire burned low and eyes grew heavy. That night, as she tucked the children into their beds, something remarkable happened. Sadie reached up and wrapped her small arms around Evelyn's neck. "I love you, Miss Evelyn," she said, her voice muffled against Evelyn's shoulder. Evelyn froze. For a moment she couldn't breathe, couldn't speak, could only hold this small, trusting child in her arms and feel her heart break and mend all at once. "I love you too, Sadie," she whispered. "I love all of you." And she meant it. God help her, she meant it. The trust grew, spreading from child to child like warmth from a fire. The twins began seeking Evelyn out, asking her questions, showing her their treasures, a pretty stone, a feather, a drawing scratched in the dirt. Micah started telling her about his adventures with his toy horse, elaborate stories that went on for hours. And even Jonas, guarded, wary Jonas, began to open up, sharing memories of his father, his mother, the family he had lost. They were becoming a family, a real family, not bound by blood, but by something stronger, by choice, by love, by the shared experience of surviving together against impossible odds. But the shadow of Hollis Briggs still loomed over them. It was late December when he appeared again. Evelyn was in town, picking up fabric for another sewing job, when she heard his voice behind her. "Miss Hart, what a pleasant surprise!" She turned slowly, schooling her features into a mask of calm she didn't feel. Briggs stood outside the saloon, his silver-handled cane planted in the snow, his expensive coat a stark contrast to the worn, patched garments of the townspeople around him. "Mr. Brigg," she said evenly. "I've been hearing things about you," he continued, moving closer. His breath formed white clouds in the cold air, and his eyes, cold, calculating, never left her face. "They say you've been working hard, sewing, cleaning, doing odd jobs, quite the industrious little bee." Evelyn said nothing, just stood there, waiting. "They also say you've been saving money, putting away every penny." He smiled, and there was no warmth in it. "Admirable, truly. But I wonder, how much have you saved? $50? 60? 70, perhaps?" Still, she said nothing. Briggs' smile widened. "Nowhere near enough, I'm guessing. And spring is coming, Miss Hart. The thaw will be here before you know it. And when it comes," he shrugged eloquently. "Well, we both know what happens then." "Why do you want that land so badly?" Evelyn asked, her voice steady despite the fear churning in her stomach. "It's 40 acres of dried-up farmland. It's barely worth anything." "It's worth plenty to me." Briggs' eyes glittered. "That creek running through the property, it feeds into my cattle operation, controls the water flow for half my grazing land. As long as those children own that property, they control my water, and I don't like being dependent on anyone." "So you're willing to throw 7 orphans out of their home, the only home they've ever known, for a creek?" "I'm willing to protect my business interests." Briggs leaned closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "This is the frontier, Miss Hart. Out here, you take what you can and hold on to it with both hands. The weak get crushed, the strong survive. Those children are weak. You are weak. And come spring, I'm going to prove it." He straightened, adjusting his coat with casual arrogance. "Enjoy the rest of your winter, Miss Hart. Make your memories while you can." And with that, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the saloon without a backward glance. Evelyn stood in the street, trembling with rage and fear. Her hands were clenched so tightly that her nails dug into her palms, leaving small crescents of pain. She wanted to scream. She wanted to run after him, to claw his eyes out, to make him understand that those children were not weak, that she was not weak, that they would fight him with every breath in their bodies. But she didn't. She couldn't. Because he was right. She was weak. They all were. 7 children and 1 woman against a man with money, power, and the law on his side. How could they possibly win? The walk back to the farm that evening was the longest of Evelyn's life. The cold seemed colder, the road seemed longer, and the weight of despair pressed down on her shoulders like a physical burden. But when she finally reached the house, when she saw the warm glow in the windows, heard the children's laughter drifting through the thin walls, something inside her shifted. She wasn't fighting for herself. She was fighting for them, for Jonas and Ruth and the twins, for Micah and Sadie and little Hope, for the family they had become, for the future they deserved. And she would not give up. No matter how hopeless it seemed, no matter how powerful Hollis Brigg was, she would find a way. She had to. January arrived, bitter and relentless, and with it came a development that caught Evelyn completely off guard. She was sitting at the kitchen table working on a dress for the storekeeper's wife, when Jonas burst through the door, his face flushed with cold and excitement. "Miss Evelyn, someone's coming! A rider! On the main road!" Evelyn set down her sewing and stood. Visitors were rare in winter, the roads were treacherous, and most people stayed close to home. Whoever was coming must have a compelling reason. She walked to the window and peered out. A figure on horseback was indeed approaching, a dark silhouette against the white landscape. As it drew closer, she could make out more details. A tall man, broad-shouldered, sitting his horse with the easy confidence of someone who had spent years in the saddle. "Do you recognize him?" she asked Jonas. The boy pressed his face against the window, squinting. "No, ma'am. I've never seen him before." The rider reached the edge of the property and stopped. He sat there for a long moment, looking at the house, the barn, the snow-covered fields. Then he dismounted, tied his horse to the fence post, and began walking toward the porch. Evelyn felt her heart begin to race. There was something about this man, something in the way he moved, the way he held himself, that sent a shiver down her spine. Not fear exactly. Something else. Something she couldn't name. She opened the door before he could knock. The man standing before her was not what she had expected. He was tall, taller than she had thought from a distance, with broad shoulders and a weathered face that spoke of years under the open sky. His hair was dark, shot through with gray at the temples, and his eyes were a startling shade of blue that seemed to see right through her. But it was the scar that caught her attention, a thin white line that ran from his left eyebrow to his jaw, slicing across his cheek in a jagged diagonal. An old wound, long healed, but still vivid against his tanned skin. He looked at her. She looked at him. And for a moment neither of them spoke. Then the man removed his hat, a battered thing stained with sweat and dust, and nodded. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low and rough. "I'm looking for the Miller place. Thomas Miller's farm." "This is it," Evelyn replied, finding her voice. "I'm Evelyn Hart, and you are?" The man hesitated. Something flickered in those blue eyes, pain maybe, or regret. "Wyatt," he said finally. "Wyatt Miller. Thomas was my brother." Behind Evelyn, she heard Jonas's sharp intake of breath. The twins appeared in the doorway, their faces pale with shock. Ruth emerged from the back room, carrying Hope, and froze when she saw the stranger. Wyatt looked past Evelyn, his gaze sweeping over the children gathered in the doorway. His jaw tightened, and she saw his hands clench at his sides. "So," he said quietly, "these are Thomas's children." "Yes." Evelyn stepped aside, opening the door wider. "Would you like to come in?" Wyatt stood motionless for a long moment, staring at the threshold as if it were a line he wasn't sure he wanted to cross. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Yeah," he said, "I reckon I would." He stepped inside, ducking his head to clear the low doorframe, and the door swung shut behind him, closing out the cold. The children hung back, watching him with wary eyes. Jonas positioned himself between Wyatt and his younger siblings, his thin body tense with protective instinct. Ruth clutched Hope tighter, her face a mask of uncertainty. Wyatt noticed. Of course he noticed. His gaze swept over the huddled children, taking in their fear, their distrust, and something that might have been shame crossed his scarred features. "They don't know me," he said quietly, more to himself than to Evelyn. "I left before most of them were born." "Why did you leave?" Jonas asked, his voice sharp. "Pa never talked about you. Ma neither. It was like you didn't exist." Wyatt flinched. The blow had landed, and it had landed hard. "I made a mistake," he said slowly. "A bad one. Cost a man his life. Your pa and we had words about it. Harsh words. I figured it was better for everyone if I just disappeared." "And now you're back," Jonas said flatly. "Now that pa's dead and ma's dead, and we're about to lose everything. Real convenient timing." "Jonas," Evelyn said quietly, but the boy ignored her. "We don't need you," he continued, his voice rising. "We were doing fine without you. We've been doing fine our whole lives without you. So why don't you just get back on your horse and ride off again? It's what you're good at, isn't it? Leaving?" The words hung in the air like knife blades. Wyatt's face had gone pale beneath his tan, and his scarred cheek twitched with suppressed emotion. "You're right," he said finally. "I'm good at leaving. It's easier than staying. Easier than facing up to the messes I've made." He paused, his blue eyes meeting Jonas's defiant stare. "But I'm trying to change that. I got your letter, Miss Hart. I rode for 3 weeks to get here, through snow and ice and territory that would kill a lesser man, because for once in my miserable life, I wanted to do the right thing." "And what's the right thing?" Jonas demanded. "Showing up now when it's too late? When Hollis Brigg is going to take our home in a few months and there's nothing any of us can do about it?" Wyatt's expression darkened at the mention of Brigg's name. "Hollis Brigg," he repeated. "That snake is still around? You know him?" "I know him." Wyatt's voice was cold. "He was already trying to steal this land when I left, trying to pressure Thomas into selling. Looks like he never gave up." "He says Pa owed him $200, Ruth said quietly. "He says if we don't pay by spring, he'll take everything." Wyatt was silent for a long moment. His jaw worked, muscles tightening beneath the scarred skin. $200, he murmured. "And how much have you got?" Evelyn retrieved the jar from beneath the floorboard and counted the contents. $63.40. "That's all?" "I've been working, sewing, cleaning, whatever I can find, but the winter has been hard and the work is scarce." Wyatt looked around the room, at the sagging walls, the drafty windows, the meager furnishings, at the children huddled together, thin and pale and frightened. "I've got some money," he said. "Not much, but some. Savings from my work as a scout. Maybe $50. Evelyn felt hope flicker in her chest. "That would put us at over 100, more than halfway there." "Still short." Wyatt shook his head. "Brigg won't accept partial payment. He wants the land, not the money. He'll find some excuse to reject whatever we offer." "Then what do we do?" Wyatt was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked at Evelyn, and there was something new in his eyes. Determination. Resolve. "We fight," he said. "We work this land. We build something worth fighting for. And when spring comes, we stand our ground." "Pretty words," Jonas said, his voice dripping with skepticism. "But words don't pay debts." "No," Wyatt agreed. "They don't. But actions might." He straightened, his shoulders squaring with purpose. "I'm not going anywhere, boy. Not this time. I made a promise to myself when I got that letter. A promise that I would see this through, whatever it takes." He paused. "I know you don't trust me. I wouldn't trust me either if I were you. But I'm asking for a chance. One chance to prove that I'm not the man I used to be." Jonas stared at him, his young face hard with anger and doubt. For a long moment, Evelyn thought he would refuse, would demand that Wyatt leave and never come back. But then Ruth spoke. "Let him stay," she said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her, and she flushed slightly, but held her ground. "Miss Evelyn can't do everything herself. She's been working herself to the bone, and it's still not enough. If this man can help, if he can really help, then we should let him try." Sadie nodded vigorously, her thumb still planted in her mouth. The twins exchanged a glance and shrugged in unison. Micah looked up from his toy horse and said, "Does he know any stories?" Jonas looked at his siblings, then back at Wyatt. His expression was unreadable. "Fine," he said at last, his voice grudging. "You can stay, but I'm watching you, you hear me? You try to run off again, try to hurt this family in any way, and I'll make you regret it." A ghost of a smile crossed Wyatt's scarred face. "Fair enough?" He turned to Evelyn, and something passed between them, an understanding perhaps, or an acknowledgement of the long road ahead. "Miss Hart," he said, extending his hand. "It seems we're in this together." Evelyn took his hand. His grip was firm, calloused, the hand of a man who had worked hard all his life. "It seems we are, Mr. Miller." The winter wind howled outside the thin walls, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote raised its voice to the cold stars. But inside the farmhouse, something had changed. A stranger had arrived, a man with a shadowed past and an uncertain future, a man who might be their salvation or their destruction. Only time would tell which. But for now, for this moment, the Miller family was together, and that was enough. The first morning after Wyatt Miller's arrival, Evelyn woke before dawn to the sound of chopping. She lay still for a moment, disoriented, listening to the rhythmic thud of an axe biting into wood. The sound was steady and powerful, each blow landing with a precision that spoke of long practice. She rose from her narrow bed and wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, then crossed to the frost-covered window and peered out into the gray pre-dawn light. Wyatt was in the yard, stripped down to his shirt sleeves despite the bitter cold, splitting logs from a fallen tree she hadn't even noticed at the edge of the property. His breath formed white clouds in the frigid air, and steam rose from his shoulders as he worked. The pile of split wood beside him was already larger than anything she had managed to accumulate in months. She watched him for a long moment, this stranger who had ridden out of the past to help a family that barely knew him. His movements were efficient, almost mechanical, as if he were trying to work through something that couldn't be solved with words. "He's been out there since before first light." Evelyn turned. Jonas stood in the doorway, his thin arms crossed over his chest, his expression unreadable. "How long have you been watching him?" she asked. "Long enough." The boy moved to stand beside her at the window. "He doesn't stop, just keeps chopping, over and over, like he's punishing himself." "Maybe he is." Jonas was silent for a moment. Then he said, "I don't trust him." "I know." "He left Pa when Pa needed him most, ran off and didn't look back. What kind of man does that?" Evelyn considered the question carefully. "A man who was afraid," she said finally. "A man who made a terrible mistake and didn't know how to live with it. That's no excuse." "No, it's not." She turned to face the boy, looking down into his fierce young face. "But people can change, Jonas. They can learn from their mistakes and try to do better. That's what makes us human. And if he doesn't, if he runs again, then we'll deal with it, together, just like we've dealt with everything else." Jonas's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. After a moment, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the back room where his siblings were still sleeping. Evelyn looked back out the window. Wyatt had paused in his chopping and was standing motionless, the axe resting on his shoulder, his scarred face turned toward the eastern horizon where the first pale fingers of dawn were beginning to reach across the sky. Whatever he was running from, she thought, he had stopped running now. The question was whether he would stay stopped. The days that followed were a revelation. Wyatt Miller worked with a ferocity that bordered on obsession. He repaired the sagging fence that had been broken for months, using materials salvaged from the ruins of an old shed. He patched the holes in the barn roof that had been letting in rain and snow. He fixed the well mechanism so that drawing water no longer required the strength of a grown man. He chopped enough firewood to last the rest of the winter and then some, stacking it neatly against the side of the house where it would stay dry. And through it all, he barely spoke. The children watched him with a mixture of fascination and fear. The twins whispered to each other whenever he passed, their eyes tracking his every movement. Micah would sit on the porch for hours, his broken toy horse forgotten in his lap, staring at this strange man who had appeared in their lives. Sadie hid behind Ruth's skirts whenever Wyatt came near, peeking out at him with enormous, uncertain eyes. Only Ruth seemed willing to approach him. She would bring him water while he worked, or a plate of food at mealtimes, hovering nearby as if waiting for something. Though what, Evelyn couldn't tell. Jonas, for his part, kept his distance. He watched Wyatt constantly, his young face hard with suspicion, but he never spoke to him directly unless absolutely necessary. The tension between them was palpable, a cold war fought in glances and silences. Evelyn tried to bridge the gap. She made a point of including Wyatt in family meals, pulling up an extra chair to their crowded table and insisting that he sit with them. She asked him questions about his travels, his work as a scout, the places he had seen. But Wyatt's answers were always brief, almost reluctant, as if he didn't feel he had earned the right to share in their warmth. "You should talk to them," she told him one evening after the children had gone to bed. They were sitting on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the clear winter sky. "The children, they're curious about you." Wyatt was silent for a long moment. His scarred face was half hidden in shadow, and she couldn't read his expression. "What would I say?" he asked finally. "I'm a stranger to them, a ghost from a past they don't remember. You're their uncle. By blood, maybe, but I haven't been family to anyone in a long time." He turned to look at her, and she saw the pain in his blue eyes. "I don't know how to do this, Miss Hart. I don't know how to be part of something. I've been alone so long I've forgotten what it feels like." Evelyn considered his words. She understood loneliness, had lived with it for most of her adult life. The empty rooms, the silent meals, the ache of having no one to share your thoughts with. It was a kind of death, slow and invisible, that hollowed you out from the inside. "Then learn," she said simply. "That's all any of us can do. Learn as we go and hope we get it right." Wyatt was quiet for a long moment. Then, so softly she almost didn't hear it, he said, "What if I don't deserve it? What if I'm just here to fail them again?" "That's your fear talking, not the truth." "How do you know?" Evelyn looked up at the stars, cold, distant, impossibly far away. "Because a man who didn't care wouldn't ask that question. A man who was truly selfish wouldn't be sitting on this porch, worrying about whether he deserves to be part of this family." She turned to face him. "You came here, Wyatt. You read my letter, and you came. That means something." Wyatt held her gaze for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the armor he had built around himself. "I don't know what I'm doing," he admitted. "I've never been good with people. Never been good with staying." "Neither have I," Evelyn said. "I was supposed to marry a stranger and become an instant mother to 7 children I'd never met. Instead, I walked into an empty yard and found a family that needed me more than I needed them." She smiled slightly. "We're all learning, Wyatt, every single day." The silence stretched between them, but it was different now. Warmer, less fraught with unspoken tension. "You're a remarkable woman, Miss Hart," Wyatt said finally. "Evelyn," she corrected. "If we're going to save this farm together, you might as well call me by my name." A ghost of a smile crossed his scarred face. "Evelyn, then." They sat together in the darkness, two strangers bound by circumstance and necessity, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead. And somewhere in the silence, something began to grow, fragile and uncertain, but real. The breakthrough came 2 weeks later, on a bitter February afternoon. Wyatt was in the barn, repairing a broken stall door, when Ruth appeared in the doorway. She stood there for a long moment, watching him work, her thin arms wrapped around herself against the cold. "Mr. Miller?" Wyatt looked up, surprised. "Yes?" "Can I ask you something?" He set down his tools and straightened, giving her his full attention. "Of course." Ruth hesitated, her breath forming white clouds in the frigid air. "Did you know my mama before she married Pa?" The question seemed to catch Wyatt off guard. His scarred face twitched, and for a moment Evelyn, who had been approaching the barn and now stood frozen just outside, thought he might not answer. But then he nodded slowly. "I did. Mary she was something special, beautiful and kind and full of life. Your pa loved her from the first moment he saw her." "What was she like? Before she had us, I mean. Before she got sick and tired all the time." Wyatt was silent for a long moment, his eyes distant with memory. "She used to laugh," he said finally. "God, how that woman could laugh. Like bells ringing or water over stones. It was the most beautiful sound I ever heard." He paused. "And she sang. Every morning while she made breakfast. Old hymns mostly, but sometimes other things. Love songs, lullabies." His voice grew rough. "She had a voice that could break your heart." Ruth's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I remember the singing," she whispered. "Just barely. I was so little when she stopped." "She stopped?" "After Hope was born. After she got sick." Ruth's voice trembled. "She never sang again, and then she was gone, and I thought I'd never know who she really was, the person she was before." Wyatt crossed the distance between them and knelt down so that he was at eye level with the girl. His scarred face was soft now, the hard edges smoothed away by grief and compassion. "She was brave," he said quietly. "Braver than anyone I ever knew. She came out here with your pa when there was nothing, just empty land and big dreams. She built this home with her own 2 hands. She bore 7 children and loved every one of you with everything she had." He reached out and touched Ruth's cheek, wiping away a tear that had escaped down her face. "You have her eyes, you know, the same color, the same fire." Ruth let out a sob and threw herself into his arms. Wyatt caught her, holding her tight against his chest, his own eyes glistening with moisture. "I miss her," Ruth wept. "I miss her so much." "I know," Wyatt murmured. "I know, sweetheart. I miss her too." They stayed that way for a long moment, the scarred drifter and the grieving child, while the wind howled outside and the cold pressed in from all sides. And watching from the doorway, Evelyn felt her heart crack open with a pain that was somehow also hope. This was what they needed. Not just the physical labor, the repairs and improvements. They needed healing. They needed connection. They needed someone to help carry the weight of all they had lost. Maybe Wyatt Miller wasn't the man he used to be. Maybe he was something better now, forged in the fire of his own mistakes, tempered by years of wandering and regret. Maybe they all were. The thaw came earlier than expected that year. By late February, the snow had begun to melt, revealing the brown, sodden earth beneath. The creek that ran through the property, the creek that Hollis Brigg coveted, swelled with runoff, its banks overflowing in places, the sound of rushing water filling the air. Spring was coming, and with it, the deadline. Evelyn had continued working throughout the winter, taking every sewing job she could find, every odd task that offered even a few cents of payment. Wyatt had contributed his savings, $47, carefully counted out from a leather pouch he kept in his saddlebags. Together with what they had already accumulated, their total stood at $118. Still not enough. Nowhere near enough. "We need more time," Evelyn said one evening, pacing the cramped kitchen while Wyatt sat at the table watching her. "If we could just have a few more months, maybe we could—" "Brigg won't give us more time," Wyatt interrupted. "I know his type. He wants this land, and he's been waiting years to get it. He's not going to let a technicality like timing get in his way." "Then what do we do?" Wyatt was silent for a long moment. His scarred face was troubled, his blue eyes dark with thought. "We make him an offer," he said finally. $118, plus a promise to pay the rest by fall. If he accepts, he won't accept. You said so yourself. Maybe not. But it forces him to show his hand. If he refuses a reasonable offer, it proves he's not interested in the money. He's interested in the land. That changes things. How? Wyatt leaned forward, his voice dropping. Brigg is powerful, but he's not all-powerful. There are laws out here, even if they're loosely enforced. If we can prove he's trying to steal this land through fraud or intimidation, we might be able to get the courts involved. Delay the seizure. Buy ourselves time. Evelyn stopped pacing. And if we can't prove it, then we stand our ground. Wyatt's jaw tightened. We make it clear that taking this land won't be easy, that there will be a cost. You're talking about violence. I'm talking about survival. His blue eyes met hers, hard and unyielding. I've spent years running from trouble, Evelyn. Running from my mistakes, my past, everything that scared me. I'm done running. These children, your children now, they deserve better than a coward for an uncle. If Brigg wants this land, he's going to have to go through me to get it. Evelyn stared at him, her heart pounding. She saw the determination in his face, the steel beneath the scarred surface. This was not the same man who had abandoned his brother years ago. This was someone new, someone forged in the furnace of regret and redemption. All right, she said quietly. We make him an offer, and if he refuses, we fight. Wyatt nodded. Together. Together. They made the offer 3 days later. Evelyn walked into Brigg's office in town, a grand building of brick and glass that dwarfed the wooden structures around it, and laid $118 on his mahogany desk. Partial payment, she said, her voice steady despite the fear churning in her stomach, with a written promise to pay the remaining $82 by October 1st. Brigg didn't touch the money. He sat behind his desk, his bulk filling the leather chair, his cold eyes fixed on her face. Partial payment, he repeated, his voice dripping with contempt. You think I'm running a charity here, Miss Hart? I think you're running a business, and any businessman would prefer partial payment over no payment at all. Brigg laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. You don't understand how this works, do you? I don't want your money. I never wanted Thomas Miller's money. I want that land. Why? It's 40 acres of dust and scrub. The only thing of value is the creek, and you could negotiate water rights without owning the property. I don't negotiate. Brigg leaned forward, his piggy eyes gleaming. I take. That's the difference between people like me and people like you, Miss Hart. You negotiate, you plead, you beg. I take what I want and crush anyone who gets in my way. Evelyn felt her fear crystallize into something harder, something colder. Then I suppose we have nothing to discuss, she said, reaching for the money. Brigg's hand shot out and covered hers, trapping it against the desk. His grip was surprisingly strong, his fingers digging into her skin. Let me make something clear, he said, his voice low and dangerous. I have lawyers. I have sheriff's deputies on my payroll. I have men who will do whatever I ask, whenever I ask. You have nothing. You are nothing. Come spring, I will take that land, and I will send those children to the orphanage, and there is nothing you can do to stop me. Evelyn met his gaze without flinching. Her heart was hammering in her chest, but she refused to let him see her fear. We'll see about that, she said quietly. She pulled her hand free, gathered the money, and walked out of the office without looking back. Her hands were shaking by the time she reached the street. She stood there for a moment, drawing deep breaths of cold air, trying to calm her racing heart. He was right. She knew he was right. They had nothing, no lawyers, no allies, no power. They were one woman, one drifter, and 7 children against a man who owned half the valley. But she had made a promise, to herself, to those children, to the memory of Thomas and Mary Miller. She would not break it. The news of Evelyn's confrontation with Brigg spread through the valley like wildfire. Within days, everyone knew. The mail-order bride who had stayed to raise a dead man's children had walked into Hollis Brigg's office and refused to back down. The reactions were mixed. Some people admired her courage. Others thought she was foolish, even reckless. A few quietly began avoiding the Miller farm, afraid of being associated with someone who had made an enemy of the most powerful man in the region. But there were others, a handful of farmers and ranchers who had their own grievances against Brigg, who began to look at Evelyn with new eyes. They didn't approach her directly, not yet, but she noticed them watching her when she came to town, nodding to her across the street, leaving small gifts on her doorstep, a bag of flour, a basket of eggs, a jar of preserved fruit. It wasn't much, but it was something. March arrived, and with it, the first hints of true spring. The snow was gone now, replaced by mud that sucked at boots and made every step a struggle. The creek was still swollen with runoff, its banks eroding in places, the sound of rushing water a constant backdrop to daily life. And then one morning, Jonas came running into the house with news that changed everything. "Riders," he gasped, bent over with his hands on his knees, "coming up the road, 4 of them." Evelyn's blood ran cold. "Brigg's men?" "I don't know, but they're armed." Wyatt was on his feet in an instant, reaching for the rifle that hung above the fireplace. "Get the children inside," he said, his voice calm but urgent. "All of them. Lock the doors and don't come out until I say." "Wyatt!" "Do it, Evelyn. Now!" She gathered the children with practiced efficiency, herding them into the back room, shushing their questions and fears. Ruth took charge of Hope, clutching the baby to her chest. The twins huddled in the corner. Micah clung to Evelyn's skirt. Sadie whimpered, her thumb in her mouth. "Stay here," Evelyn told them. "Stay quiet. Everything's going to be all right." She didn't know if that was true, but she said it anyway, because that was what mothers did. Then she returned to the front room where Wyatt stood by the window, his rifle ready. "I told you to stay with the children," he said, without looking at her. "I'm not hiding while you face them alone." "Evelyn, this is my family," she said fiercely. "My home. I have every right to defend it." Wyatt turned to look at her. For a moment, something flickered in his blue eyes. Admiration, maybe, or respect. Then he nodded. All right, but stay behind me. They stepped out onto the porch together, standing side by side as the riders approached. There were 4 of them, as Jonas had said. Big men on big horses, their faces hard and weathered by sun and wind. They wore pistols on their hips and carried rifles in their saddle scabbards. One of them, the leader, judging by his position at the front, had a star pinned to his vest. A deputy. One of Briggs' bought men. The riders stopped at the edge of the property, their horses stamping and snorting in the cold air. "Wyatt Miller," the deputy called out, his voice carrying across the muddy yard. "Been a long time." Wyatt's grip tightened on his rifle. "Burke, can't say I'm pleased to see you." "Feelings mutual." The deputy spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the ground. "Mr. Briggs sent us with a message." "I'm listening." Burke grinned, a cold, humorless expression. "He says the deadline's been moved up. You've got 2 weeks to clear out, or we'll clear you out ourselves." "On what authority?" "On the authority of the law." Burke tapped the star on his chest. "Mr. Brigg filed papers with the county, says you've been in default on your debt for over a year. Judge signed the seizure order this morning." Evelyn felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "That's not possible. The deadline was spring, first thaw. We still have time." "First thaw was last week, ma'am. In case you hadn't noticed, the snow's all melted." Burke's grin widened. 2 weeks. That's the deal. Take it or leave it." Wyatt raised his rifle, sighting down the barrel at Burke's chest. "And if we refuse?" The other riders tensed, hands moving toward their weapons. But Burke held up a hand, stopping them. "Then we come back with more men, and we won't be so polite next time." He turned his horse, preparing to leave, then paused and looked back. "Oh, and Miller, Mr. Brigg wanted me to tell you something else. He knows you're back. He knows what happened in Laramie 8 years ago. Says he'd hate for that information to get out. Might be uncomfortable for everyone." Something changed in Wyatt's face. The color drained from his scarred cheeks, and his hands trembled slightly on the rifle. "You tell Brigg," he said, his voice low and dangerous, "that if he threatens this family again, I'll kill him myself." Burke laughed. 2 weeks, Miller. Clock's ticking." The riders wheeled their horses and galloped away, disappearing down the muddy road in a thunder of hooves. Silence fell over the farmyard. Wyatt stood motionless, his rifle still raised, his eyes fixed on the spot where the riders had vanished. "Wyatt?" Evelyn touched his arm gently. "What happened in Laramie?" For a long moment he didn't answer. His jaw was clenched, the scar on his cheek standing out white against his pale skin. Then, slowly, he lowered the rifle and turned to face her. "I killed a man," he said. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and terrible. "It was 8 years ago," Wyatt continued, his voice flat, drained of emotion. "I was working as a scout for a trading company. There was a dispute over money. I don't even remember what exactly. Things got heated. The other man drew on me, and He trailed off, his eyes distant. "He died. I didn't mean to kill him, but he died anyway." "Was it self-defense?" "That's what the judge said. But the man I killed, he had family, powerful family. They wanted revenge. That's why I ran. That's why I left Thomas and Mary and the children. I thought if I disappeared, the trouble would disappear with me. But it didn't. No." Wyatt's voice was bitter. "It never does. And now Brigg knows, which means he has leverage. He can threaten to expose me, turn me over to the men who want me dead." Evelyn felt cold fear spreading through her chest. "What do we do?" Wyatt was silent for a long moment. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of mud and new growth and distant rain. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "For the first time in my life, I truly don't know." They stood together on the porch, 2 people caught in a trap that seemed to have no escape, while the children waited inside, their futures hanging by a thread. That evening, after the children had been fed and put to bed, Evelyn and Wyatt sat at the kitchen table in the flickering candlelight. The silence between them was heavy with unspoken fears and desperate calculations. "We have 2 weeks," Evelyn said finally. "Less than that, really. 14 days to find $82 or fight off Briggs' men or something." She laughed bitterly. "I don't even know what something looks like anymore." Wyatt stared at the table, his scarred face drawn and tired. "I've been thinking." "About what?" About leaving. He held up a hand before she could protest. Hear me out. If I'm gone, Brigg loses his leverage. He can't threaten to expose me if I'm not here. And without that threat, maybe he'll... No. Evelyn's voice was sharp. Absolutely not. Evelyn, no, Wyatt. Listen to me. She reached across the table and took his hands in hers, forcing him to meet her eyes. You leaving won't solve anything. Brigg doesn't just want you gone, he wants this land. If you disappear, he'll still come for the farm. He'll still take everything. But at least the children won't be caught in the crossfire of my mistakes. They're already caught, we all are. And running won't change that. She squeezed his hands tightly. You said you were done running. You said you wanted to do the right thing for once. This is your chance, Wyatt. Stay, fight, help me protect this family. Wyatt's blue eyes searched her face, looking for something, doubt maybe, or hesitation. But Evelyn met his gaze steadily, refusing to look away. Why do you believe in me? He asked, his voice rough. After everything I've done, everything I've told you, why? Because I've seen who you are, she said simply. Not the man you used to be, the man you're becoming, the man who stays up chopping wood so the children won't be cold, the man who held Ruth while she cried about her mother, the man who teaches Micah how to whittle and lets Sadie braid his hair. She smiled slightly. That man is worth believing in. Wyatt was silent for a long moment. Then slowly, he raised her hands to his lips and kissed them gently. All right, he said. I'll stay. We'll fight this together. Together. The word hung between them, a promise and a prayer. And somewhere in the darkness outside, the wind carried the faint sound of distant thunder, a storm gathering on the horizon, ready to break. The next morning brought an unexpected development. Evelyn was hanging laundry on the line, the simple mundane task a strange comfort in the midst of their crisis, when she saw a wagon approaching on the road. Not riders this time, but a single wagon, driven by a woman in a worn sunbonnet. As the wagon drew closer, Evelyn recognized her, Mrs. Patterson, the rancher's wife who had hired her to make the wedding dress. Mrs. Patterson! Evelyn called out, wiping her hands on her apron as she walked to meet the wagon. What brings you out here? Mrs. Patterson pulled the wagon to a stop and climbed down, her weathered face grim. I heard about what happened yesterday. Brigg's men coming here threatening you. News travels fast. It does when Hollis Brigg is involved. Mrs. Patterson looked around the property, taking in the repairs Wyatt had made, the neat stacks of firewood, the children playing in the yard. You've done good work here, Miss Hart. Made something out of nothing. We've tried. More than tried. Succeeded. Mrs. Patterson turned to face her, and there was something fierce in her eyes. I've lived in this valley for 30 years. I've seen Brigg buy up land, squeeze out small farmers, ruin anyone who got in his way. I've watched good people lose everything because they didn't have the money or the power to fight back. She paused. But you're different. You didn't run. You stood your ground. Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes. I didn't have a choice. Those children, they needed someone. We all need someone. Mrs. Patterson reached into the wagon and pulled out a leather pouch. Which is why I'm here. She pressed the pouch into Evelyn's hands. It was heavy, much heavier than Evelyn expected. What is this? $20. My contribution to your fight against Brigg. Evelyn stared at the pouch, then at Mrs. Patterson. I can't accept this. It's too much. You can, and you will. Mrs. Patterson's voice brooked no argument. I've been saving that money for years, waiting for a chance to do something that mattered. This is my chance. She smiled slightly. Besides, I'm not the only one. There are others in the valley, people who've suffered under Brigg, people who are tired of being afraid. They want to help too. Help how? Money, mostly. What we can spare. It won't be enough to pay off your debt entirely, but it might be enough to make a difference. Mrs. Patterson's eyes hardened. And if it comes to a fight, if Brigg sends his men again, well, there are a few of us who know how to handle a rifle. Evelyn felt something swell in her chest, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Real, tangible hope. Why? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Why would you do this for us? Mrs. Patterson was quiet for a moment, looking out over the muddy fields, the swollen creek, the ramshackle house that had somehow become a home. Because you stayed, she said finally. When anyone else would have left, you stayed. You fought for children that weren't even yours, loved them like they were your own blood. That kind of courage, that kind of love, it's rare, Miss Hart, and it deserves to be protected. She climbed back onto her wagon and gathered the reins. I'll spread the word, she said. There will be others. You're not alone in this fight. Then she snapped the reins, and the wagon rolled away down the muddy road. Evelyn stood in the yard, clutching the leather pouch, and for the first time since Briggs' men had delivered their ultimatum, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity and emotion. True to Mrs. Patterson's word, others began to come forward, farmers and ranchers, shopkeepers and craftsmen, ordinary people who had suffered under Briggs' tyranny and were finally ready to push back. They brought money, $5 here, $10 there, whatever they could spare. They brought food and supplies, and most importantly, they brought hope. By the end of the first week, the Miller family's war chest had grown to $163. Still not enough to pay off the debt entirely, but close. Closer than Evelyn had ever dared to dream. But Briggs was not idle. He sent his men to intimidate the families who had contributed, threatening foreclosure and worse. He spread rumors about Wyatt's past, about the killing in Laramie, trying to turn public opinion against them. He even tried to bribe the local newspaper editor to print lies about Evelyn, lies about impropriety, about her relationship with Wyatt, about the children's welfare. Some people believed the rumors. Some turned away, afraid of Briggs' retribution, but others held firm, refusing to be cowed. Let him spread his lies, Mrs. Patterson said, when Evelyn expressed her concerns. The people who matter know the truth, and the truth always wins in the end. Evelyn wished she could share her confidence, but as the deadline approached, 10 days, then 8, then 6, the knot of fear in her stomach grew tighter and tighter. It was Jonas who finally broke the tension. He found Evelyn alone on the porch one evening, staring out at the sunset, her mind 1,000 miles away. Miss Evelyn? She turned. The boy stood in the doorway, his young face serious. Yes, Jonas? He was quiet for a moment, as if gathering his thoughts. Then he said, I've been thinking about what you said, about people changing, about learning from their mistakes. And? I was wrong about him, about Wyatt. Jonas swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. I've been watching him, really watching. And I see it now, the way he looks at us, the way he works himself to exhaustion every day, the way he holds hope like she's made of glass. His voice trembled slightly. He's not the same man who left Pa all those years ago. He's different, better. Evelyn felt tears spring to her eyes. That's a very mature observation, Jonas. I'm trying to be mature, trying to be the man Pa wanted me to be. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. I don't want to lose this family, Miss Evelyn. I don't want to lose you or Wyatt or any of my brothers and sisters. Whatever happens with Briggs, whatever it takes, I want to fight. I want to stay together. Evelyn opened her arms, and Jonas stepped into them, burying his face against her shoulder. She held him tightly, this brave, broken boy who had been forced to grow up too fast, and made him a silent promise. She would not let them be torn apart, no matter what it took. 4 days before the deadline, Hollis Briggs himself came to the Miller farm. He arrived in a fine carriage pulled by matched black horses with 4 armed riders as escort. The carriage rolled to a stop in front of the house, and Briggs emerged, brushing invisible dust from his expensive coat. Evelyn and Wyatt were waiting on the porch. Behind them, barely visible through the window, the children watched with wide, frightened eyes. Mr. Briggs, Evelyn said, her voice carefully controlled, to what do we owe this pleasure? Briggs smiled, a cold, predatory expression. I thought we might have one final conversation before the deadline. Clear the air, so to speak. There's nothing to clear. We know where we stand. Do you? Briggs' eyes swept over the property, lingering on Wyatt's tense form. I hear you've been collecting money, begging from your neighbors, scraping together pennies. It's almost pathetic. We have $178, Evelyn said. With 4 days left, we may well reach your 200. And if you do, you think that changes anything? Brigg laughed. I told you before, Miss Hart, I don't want your money. I want this land, and I always get what I want. Wyatt stepped forward, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. Maybe not this time. Brigg's eyes narrowed. Ah, yes, the prodigal brother, the killer. He shook his head in mock sorrow. You know, I've been in contact with some people in Laramie. The family of the man you murdered. They're very interested in your whereabouts. It was self-defense. The courts ruled courts can be wrong or persuaded to reconsider. Brigg's smile widened. Here's my final offer. Leave. Now. Today. Take the children to the orphanage, walk away from this land, and I'll make sure those men from Laramie never find you. You can disappear again, start over somewhere new. Wyatt was silent for a long moment. Evelyn could see the conflict in his face, the old fear, the ingrained instinct to run. But then he squared his shoulders and met Brigg's gaze. No, he said. I'm done running. Brigg's expression hardened. You're making a mistake. Maybe. But it's my mistake to make. Wyatt stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. You want this land? You come and take it. But know this. If you threaten these children again, if you send your men here to intimidate this family, I will put you in the ground, and no amount of money or lawyers or bought deputies will save you. For a moment, genuine fear flickered in Brigg's eyes, but he recovered quickly, smoothing his expression into something resembling composure. 4 days, he said, turning back toward his carriage. 4 days, and this will all be over. Enjoy them while you can. He climbed into the carriage and drove away, his escort trailing behind, leaving only silence and tension in his wake. Evelyn released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her legs were trembling, and she gripped the porch railing for support. That went well, she said weakly. Wyatt didn't laugh. His face was pale, his jaw clenched tight. He's not bluffing, he said. About Laramie. About any of it. When the deadline comes, he'll send everything he has. Then we'll be ready. Wyatt turned to look at her, and she saw something in his eyes she had never seen before. Fear, yes, but also determination. And something else, something that looked almost like love. Evelyn, he said quietly, whatever happens, I want you to know. Don't. She reached out and touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his scar. Don't say goodbye. We're not done fighting yet. He caught her hand and held it against his cheek. I wasn't going to say goodbye. I was going to say thank you for believing in me, for giving me a chance to be the man I should have been all along. Evelyn felt tears spill down her cheeks. You've always been that man, Wyatt. You just needed someone to remind you. They stood together on the porch, hand in hand, as the sun set behind the hills and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. 4 days. 4 days until everything changed, but they would face it together, and whatever came, whatever Hollis Brigg threw at them, they would not break. The days bled into one another, each hour heavier than the last. Evelyn stopped sleeping through the night, lying awake in the darkness with her ears straining for sounds of approaching riders. Wyatt patrolled the perimeter of the property until well past midnight, his rifle never far from his hands. Even the children sensed the tension, their laughter fading into whispers, their games abandoned in favor of huddling close to the adults who had become their protectors. 3 days remained when Mrs. Patterson returned, this time with 2 other women from the valley. They brought with them another $27, collected from families who had heard about the standoff with Brigg and wanted to contribute. That puts you at $205, Mrs. Patterson said, counting out the coins on the kitchen table. More than enough to pay off the debt. Evelyn stared at the pile of money, her heart torn between hope and despair. But you heard what Brigg said. He doesn't want the money. He wants the land. Then we force him to take the money. Mrs. Patterson's weathered face was hard with determination. We make the payment publicly, in front of witnesses. The whole town, if we can manage it. If he refuses to accept it, everyone will know he's not interested in collecting a debt. He's trying to steal property that doesn't belong to him. Wyatt, who had been standing by the window, turned to face them. That might work. Brigg cares about his reputation. He's built his empire on the pretense of being a legitimate businessman. If we expose him as a thief in front of the whole valley, he'll have to accept the payment, Evelyn finished, hope kindling in her chest, or face the consequences of refusing. Exactly, Mrs. Patterson nodded firmly. We've already started spreading the word. By the time the deadline arrives, half the valley will be in town to watch. Brigg won't be able to hide behind his lawyers and his bought deputies. He'll have to answer to the people. Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes. Why are you doing this, all of you? You barely know us. One of the other women, a young rancher's wife named Sarah, spoke up. Because we know Brigg. We know what he's capable of. My husband's family had a small farm east of here before Brigg decided he wanted their water rights. He drove them off the land with threats and false debts, same as he's trying to do to you. They lost everything. Her voice trembled with barely suppressed anger. I won't stand by and watch that happen again. Not if I can help it. The third woman, an older widow named Mrs. Chen, who ran a small laundry in town, nodded in agreement. My husband came to this country with nothing. He built our business from the ground up, working 16-hour days until his hands bled. Brigg tried to force us out too, said the Chinese had no right to own property in his town. But we fought him, and we won. She smiled, revealing missing teeth. You can win too, Miss Hart. You just need to show him that you're not afraid. Evelyn looked at these women, these strangers who had become allies, and felt something shift inside her. For months she had been fighting alone, carrying the weight of 7 children and an impossible debt on her shoulders. She had convinced herself that no one else cared, that the world was cold and indifferent to their suffering. But she had been wrong. There were good people out there, people who believed in justice, in fairness, in standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves, people who were willing to risk their own safety and security to help a family they barely knew. She wasn't alone. She had never been alone. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you all. Mrs. Patterson waved a dismissive hand. Don't thank us yet. The fight isn't over. Brigg won't go down without a battle. I know, Evelyn said, but at least now we have a chance. That night, after the visitors had left and the children were asleep, Evelyn sat with Wyatt on the front porch, watching the stars wheel overhead. The night was cold but clear, the sky a vast canopy of silver light. Do you think it will work? Evelyn asked quietly. The public payment, the witnesses, do you really think Brigg will back down? Wyatt was silent for a long moment, his scarred face unreadable in the darkness. Honestly, I don't know. Brigg is unpredictable, dangerous. He's not used to being challenged, and men like him don't take kindly to losing. So there's a chance he'll refuse anyway, even with the whole town watching. Yes. Wyatt turned to look at her, his blue eyes reflecting the starlight. There's always a chance. That's why we need to be prepared for anything. What kind of anything? Wyatt didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out something small and metallic. In the dim light, Evelyn couldn't see what it was at first. Then he pressed it into her hand. A derringer. A tiny 2-shot pistol, small enough to fit in her palm. Do you know how to use this? He asked. Evelyn stared at the weapon, her heart pounding. I've never fired a gun in my life. Then I'll teach you. Tomorrow. First thing. Wyatt's voice was calm but serious. I'm not saying you'll need to use it. I pray you never have to. But if something goes wrong, if Brigg's men come and I can't protect you, I want you to be able to defend yourself. Defend the children. Evelyn felt the cold weight of the derringer in her hand. It was small, almost delicate, but the deadliness of it was unmistakable. I don't know if I can, she said quietly. Kill someone, I mean, even to protect the children. You'd be surprised what you're capable of when the people you love are in danger. Wyatt's voice was soft now, almost gentle. I've seen ordinary people do extraordinary things when pushed to the limit, and you, Evelyn Hart, are far from ordinary. She looked up at him, at this scarred, broken man who had ridden out of the past to help a family that barely knew him. In the months since his arrival, she had come to rely on him, not just for his strength and his skills, but for his presence, his steadiness, his quiet faith in her abilities. Neither are you, she said. Whatever happened in Laramie, whatever mistakes you made, you're a good man, Wyatt Miller. The children know it. I know it. Wyatt's face contorted with emotion. Gratitude, maybe, or something deeper. Evelyn, he began. Don't. She reached out and took his hand, threading her fingers through his. Don't argue with me. Just accept it. For a long moment they sat together in silence, hands intertwined, watching the stars. Then Wyatt spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. If we survive this, if we actually manage to save this farm and keep this family together, there's something I want to ask you. Evelyn's heart stuttered. What kind of something? The kind I shouldn't be thinking about right now with everything else going on. He paused, and she could hear him struggling to find the right words. The kind that might be foolish and presumptuous and completely inappropriate. Wyatt, I know it's not the time, but I need you to know. He turned to face her, his blue eyes burning with intensity. I need you to know that whatever happens, you've changed me, given me something to believe in again, and He broke off, shaking his head. Never mind. Forget I said anything. But Evelyn didn't forget. She couldn't forget. She lay awake long into the night, the derringer hidden beneath her pillow, thinking about Wyatt's words and what they might mean, about the future that might be waiting for them, if they could just survive the next 2 days. The morning of the second to last day dawned gray and cold, with clouds gathering on the western horizon. Wyatt took Evelyn out behind the barn and taught her to shoot the derringer, how to hold it, how to aim, how to brace for the recoil. The gun was small but powerful, and by the time they finished, her hands were shaking and her ears were ringing. You're a natural, Wyatt said, though his expression was grim. Let's hope you never have to prove it. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Wyatt checked and rechecked his rifle, oiled the pistol he wore on his hip, sharpened the knife in his boot. Jonas helped him fortify the barn, stacking bales of hay to provide cover if things turned violent. Ruth took charge of the younger children, drilling them on where to hide and what to do if they heard gunshots. It was surreal, Evelyn thought, watching these children, these innocent, frightened children, prepare for the possibility of combat. They should have been playing, laughing, enjoying the carefree days of youth. Instead, they were learning to survive in a world that wanted to tear them apart. She made a silent vow. If they got through this, she would give them back their childhood. Every game they had missed, every moment of joy that had been stolen from them, she would find a way to restore it. But first, they had to survive. That evening, as the sun set behind the gathering clouds, a rider appeared on the road. Evelyn's heart leaped into her throat, her hand instinctively reaching for the derringer in her pocket. But as the rider drew closer, she realized it wasn't one of Briggs' men. It was Dr. Hartley, the thin, nervous physician who had given her the peppermint oil for hope all those months ago. He dismounted quickly, his face pale and drawn. Miss Hart, I came as soon as I heard. Heard what? Briggs planning something. Dr. Hartley's voice was urgent, his words tumbling over each other. I was at the saloon this afternoon, not drinking, just passing through, and I heard his men talking. They're not planning to wait for the deadline. They're coming tonight. Evelyn felt the blood drain from her face. Tonight? But we still have 2 days. Briggs doesn't care about the deadline. He never did. He's going to raid the farm under cover of darkness, before you can gather your witnesses, before the town can intervene. Dr. Hartley grabbed her arm, his grip surprisingly strong. You need to leave, now. Take the children and run. Wyatt had appeared on the porch, rifle in hand. How many men? At least a dozen, maybe more, armed with rifles and pistols. Dr. Hartley's eyes were wide with fear. You can't fight them, Mr. Miller. There are too many. We're not running, Evelyn said, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. This is our home. Those children's home. We won't abandon it. Then you'll die. All of you. Dr. Hartley's voice cracked. Please, Miss Hart, be reasonable. Your lives are worth more than a piece of land. It's not about the land, Wyatt said quietly. It's about what we stand for, what we're willing to fight for. He met Evelyn's eyes, and something passed between them, an understanding, a promise. If we run now, Briggs wins. Not just this battle, but all the ones that come after. Every family he threatens, every farm he tries to steal, they'll all look at us and think, Why bother fighting? The Millers ran, and so should we. So you're going to make a stand against a dozen armed men? No. Wyatt's smile was grim but determined. We're going to call in reinforcements. They moved quickly after that. Doctor. Hartley was dispatched to town with instructions to spread the word. Brigg was attacking the Miller farm tonight. Anyone who wanted to stand against him should come now, immediately, before it was too late. Jonas was sent to the Patterson Ranch, the closest neighbor who had pledged support. He went on foot, sprinting through the gathering darkness with the message burning in his mind. Bring guns, bring people, bring hope. Evelyn gathered the children and led them to the root cellar beneath the barn, the safest place on the property. Ruth carried Hope, who was sleeping peacefully, blissfully unaware of the danger. The twins clutched each other, their faces pale with fear. Micah held his broken toy horse like a talisman, and Sadie clung to Evelyn's skirts, refusing to let go. I want you to stay here, Evelyn said, kneeling to face them. No matter what happens, no matter what you hear, stay hidden. Do you understand? What if they find us? Peter asked, his voice trembling. They won't. This cellar is hidden. No one knows about it except us. Evelyn forced a smile she didn't feel. Everything's going to be all right. I promise. It was a lie, and she knew it, but lies were all she had to give them. She left the children in Ruth's capable hands and climbed back up into the barn, where Wyatt was loading his rifle by the light of a single lantern. They're safe? He asked, without looking up. As safe as they can be? Good. He finished loading and set the rifle aside, then turned to face her. Evelyn, I need you to promise me something. What? If things go bad, if it looks like we're going to lose, I want you to take the children and run. Don't look back. Don't try to help me, just get them out. Evelyn shook her head fiercely. I'm not leaving you. Evelyn, no. We're in this together, Wyatt. We fight together, or we fall together. That's how it works. Wyatt stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly a smile spread across his scarred face. A real smile, full of warmth and admiration, and something that looked very much like love. You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met, he said. I'll take that as a compliment. It was meant as one. They stood together in the dim light of the lantern, two people bound by circumstance and choice, waiting for the storm to break. It came just after midnight. Evelyn heard them before she saw them. The thunder of hooves on the dirt road, the jingle of harnesses, the low murmur of men's voices. She was crouched behind a stack of hay bales, the derringer clutched in her sweat-slicked hands, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Wyatt was across the barn, positioned near the door with his rifle trained on the entrance. His face was calm, almost serene, the face of a man who had made peace with whatever was about to happen. The riders stopped just beyond the property line. In the darkness, Evelyn could make out their silhouettes, at least a dozen, maybe more, arrayed in a loose semicircle around the farmhouse. Then a voice rang out, harsh and commanding. Wyatt Miller, we know you're in there. Come out with your hands up, and no one has to get hurt. It was Burke, the deputy who had delivered Briggs' ultimatum. His voice was thick with alcohol and anticipation. Wyatt didn't respond. He just waited, silent and motionless, his finger resting on the trigger. Last chance, Miller. You've got 10 seconds before we burn this place to the ground. Still nothing. Fine, have it your way. Evelyn heard the scrape of a match, saw a tiny flame flare in the darkness. One of Briggs' men had lit a torch, and he was moving toward the barn with deadly intent. She raised the derringer, aiming at the approaching figure, her hands trembling. And then, from somewhere behind Briggs' men, a shot rang out. The man with the torch cried out and dropped, the flames sputtering in the dirt. Chaos erupted as Briggs' riders wheeled their horses, trying to identify the source of the attack. More shots followed, coming from multiple directions. Evelyn saw muzzle flashes in the darkness, from the tree line to the east, from the rocky outcropping to the west, from the road itself. What the hell? Burke's voice was high with panic. We're surrounded! Fall back! Fall back! But there was nowhere to fall back to. The shooters had positioned themselves perfectly, cutting off every avenue of retreat. Wyatt burst from the barn, rifle blazing. Two of Briggs' men fell before the rest realized what was happening. Burke tried to return fire, but a bullet from somewhere in the darkness clipped his shoulder, sending him tumbling from his horse with a shriek of pain. In the space of seconds, the ambush had turned into a rout. Briggs' men scattered, some fleeing on horseback, others on foot, abandoning their wounded comrades in their haste to escape. The sounds of gunfire faded, replaced by the groans of the injured and the distant thunder of retreating hooves. And then, silence. Evelyn emerged from the barn on shaking legs, the derringer still clutched in her hand. She stared at the carnage in the yard. 3 of Briggs' men down, Burke writhing in the dirt, riderless horses milling in confusion, and felt her mind struggle to process what had just happened. "Evelyn!" She turned. Wyatt was running toward her, his rifle smoking, his face streaked with gunpowder and sweat. "Are you all right? Are you hurt?" "I'm fine. She stopped, staring past him. "Who are they?" Wyatt turned to look. Figures were emerging from the darkness, men and women carrying rifles and shotguns, their faces grim but triumphant. Evelyn recognized Mrs. Patterson, her gray hair wild beneath her bonnet. There was Sarah, the young rancher's wife, and Mrs. Chen, the Chinese laundress. Dr. Hartley was there too, looking terrified but determined, a pistol clutched in his ink-stained hands. And behind them, more people, farmers and ranchers, shopkeepers and craftsmen, the ordinary citizens of the valley who had finally decided to take a stand. "We got the message," Mrs. Patterson said, striding forward. "Figured you could use some help." Evelyn felt tears streaming down her face. "How did you—" "There were so many of them." "There were more of us." Mrs. Patterson smiled grimly. "Briggs had this coming for a long time. We just needed someone to show us we could fight back." Jonas appeared from the shadows, breathing hard from his run. "I got to the Patterson place just in time. They were already arming up when I arrived." "We'd been planning this for days," Mrs. Patterson explained. "Ever since we heard what Briggs was up to. We figured he might try something underhanded, so we set up a network, people watching the roads, ready to mobilize at a moment's notice." Wyatt shook his head in disbelief. "You organized all of this? Behind our backs?" "Behind Briggs' back, more like." Mrs. Patterson's eyes glittered with satisfaction. "He thought he was the only one who could play games. He was wrong." A groan from the ground drew their attention. Burke was trying to crawl away, his wounded shoulder leaving a trail of blood in the dirt. Wyatt strode over and planted his boot on the deputy's back, pressing him flat. "Going somewhere?" Burke's face was twisted with pain and fear. "Please, don't kill me. I was just following orders." "Whose orders? Briggs?" Yes, he told us to raid the farm, scare you off. He didn't say anything about killing." "Liar!" Wyatt's voice was ice. "You came here with torches. You were going to burn this family alive." "I wasn't. I swear. Save it for the judge." Wyatt looked up at the assembled crowd. "Someone tie this man up. Him and any others still breathing. They're going to answer for what they tried to do here tonight." Several men stepped forward, producing ropes and binding the wounded attackers. Burke continued to protest his innocence, his voice growing increasingly desperate, but no one was listening. Evelyn turned away from the scene, her legs suddenly weak. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the attack was fading, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion. "Evelyn?" Wyatt was beside her, his hand on her arm. "Are you sure you're all right?" "I don't know." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I've never been in a gunfight before. Is it always like this? The fear, the chaos, the—" She gestured helplessly at the carnage around them. "Yeah." Wyatt's voice was soft. "It's always like this. That's why I tried so hard to leave it behind." "But you didn't. You stayed." "I stayed." He reached up and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "For you, for the children, for the chance to finally do something right." Evelyn felt her heart swell with emotion, gratitude, relief, and something deeper, something she was only beginning to understand. "The children," she said suddenly. "I need to tell them it's over. They must be terrified down there." She turned and ran toward the barn, Wyatt following close behind. They descended into the root cellar, where Ruth and the younger children were huddled together in the darkness. "Miss Evelyn!" Ruth's voice was high with fear. "We heard shooting, so much shooting." "It's over." Evelyn dropped to her knees and gathered as many of the children as she could into her arms. It's over. We're safe. Everyone's safe. The twins burst into tears. Micah clutched his toy horse and stared at her with wide eyes. Sadie threw her arms around Evelyn's neck and refused to let go. And Hope, little Hope, woke from her sleep and looked around at her family with bright, curious eyes, completely unaware of how close they had all come to destruction. Is Brig gone? Jonas asked, his voice trembling despite his efforts to appear brave. Did we beat him? Not yet, Wyatt said from the cellar entrance. But we hurt him badly tonight. His men are scattered, his deputy is in custody, and the whole valley knows what he tried to do. He smiled, a thin, tired smile, but genuine. The fight's not over. But for tonight, we won. They emerged from the cellar to find the farmyard transformed. Lanterns had been lit, casting warm circles of light across the muddy ground. The captured attackers had been secured and placed in a wagon, guarded by armed volunteers. And everywhere people were talking, laughing, celebrating the victory they had won together. Mrs. Patterson approached, her face flushed with triumph. We're going to take these prisoners to town tonight, lock them up in the jail and send for the federal marshal. What they tried to do here, it's beyond the authority of a bought deputy and a corrupt businessman. It's a matter for real law. What about Brig himself? Evelyn asked. He wasn't with them tonight. No, he's too smart for that. He always lets other people do his dirty work. Mrs. Patterson's expression hardened. But that won't save him this time. Burke will talk. They all will, once they realize Brig can't protect them anymore. By the time the marshal gets here, we'll have enough evidence to put Brig behind bars for years. Evelyn felt hope kindling in her chest. Real hope, not the fragile, desperate thing she had been clinging to for months. You really think it's possible? That we could actually stop him? I think we already have. Mrs. Patterson put a hand on her shoulder. You started this, Miss Hart. You showed us that ordinary people could stand up to men like Brig and win. Whatever happens next, that will never change. The wagon carrying the prisoners departed, accompanied by a dozen armed escorts. Dr. Hartley went with them, promising to treat the wounded once they reached town and to serve as a witness to everything that had transpired. Slowly, the crowd began to disperse. Farmers and ranchers said their goodbyes, promising to return if needed, offering words of support and encouragement. By the time the eastern sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn, only a handful of people remained, the core group who had organized the defense. You should get some rest, Mrs. Patterson told Evelyn. It's been a long night. The children need you. What about you? I've survived on less sleep than this, Mrs. Patterson smiled. We'll keep watch until morning. Make sure Brig doesn't try anything else. You take care of your family. Evelyn nodded, too exhausted to argue. She gathered the children, some walking, some carried, and led them back to the house. The building was cold and dark, the fire having burned down hours ago, but she didn't care. She piled blankets on the floor of the main room, creating a makeshift bed large enough for all of them, and they curled up together in a tangle of arms and legs. Hope was already asleep in Ruth's arms. The twins had cried themselves out and lay still, their breathing slow and even. Micah clutched his toy horse, his thumb creeping toward his mouth in an unconscious echo of Sadie's old habit. And Sadie herself was pressed against Evelyn's side, her small body warm and trusting. Jonas lay apart from the others, his back turned, but Evelyn could see the tension in his shoulders. Jonas, she said softly, I'm fine. I know, but I wanted to tell you something. He turned reluctantly to face her. You were brave tonight, Evelyn said, running to get help, making sure reinforcements arrived in time. We couldn't have won without you. I didn't do anything. I ran. Running is doing something, especially when the people you love are counting on you. She reached out and touched his cheek. Your father would be proud of you, Jonas. So would your mother. And her voice broke. I am so proud of you. Of all of you. Jonas's composure cracked, and the tears he had been holding back finally spilled down his face. He crawled across the blankets and buried his head in Evelyn's lap, his thin body shaking with sobs. I was so scared, he gasped. I thought they were going to kill everyone. I thought I was going to lose you, like I lost Ma and Pa. Shh. Evelyn stroked his hair, feeling her own tears fall. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. None of us are. They stayed that way until Jonas's sobs subsided, until his breathing deepened into sleep. Then Evelyn lay back, surrounded by the children she had come to love as her own, and closed her eyes. She had won tonight. They all had. But the fight wasn't over yet. The next morning, Evelyn woke to the sound of wagons approaching. She disentangled herself from the sleeping children and went to the window, her heart lurching with a mix of hope and fear. But it wasn't Briggs' men. It was everyone else. Wagons lined the dirt road, stretching back as far as she could see. Men, women, and children poured from them, carrying bundles and boxes and crates of every size. The yard was filled with people, familiar faces and strangers alike, all converging on the Miller farm. What in the world? Evelyn stepped outside, shading her eyes against the morning sun. Mrs. Patterson was there, directing traffic like a general commanding troops. She spotted Evelyn and strode over, her face alight with purpose. Good, you're awake. We've got a lot of work to do. What is all this? This is the valley coming together. Mrs. Patterson gestured at the assembled crowd. Word spread about what happened last night, how you stood your ground, how Briggs' attack failed, how ordinary people can fight back against tyranny. People want to help. They want to be part of something. Evelyn stared at the crowd, overwhelmed. But we can't accept. Yes, you can, and yes, you will. Mrs. Patterson's voice brooked no argument. These people aren't just giving you charity. They're investing in a symbol, a sign that things can change, that the little folks can win against the big folks. She paused, her weathered face softening. You gave them hope, Miss Hart. The least they can do is return the favor. The day that followed was unlike anything Evelyn had ever experienced. People swarmed over the property, repairing, rebuilding, transforming. Men replaced the sagging porch with sturdy new timbers. Women patched the holes in the roof, cleaned the windows, scrubbed the floors. Children ran through the yard, chasing each other and shrieking with laughter, while their parents worked alongside strangers who had become allies. Food appeared as if by magic: roast chickens and fresh bread, pies and preserves, more variety than the Miller children had seen in months. Ruth stared at the bounty with tears in her eyes, and little Sadie ate until her belly bulged, then fell asleep in a sunbeam like a contented cat. And the money kept coming. Every family who came brought something: a few coins, a crumpled bill, whatever they could spare. By noon, the pile on the kitchen table had grown to almost $300. By evening, it had passed $400, more than enough to pay off Briggs' debt twice over. I don't understand, Evelyn said to Wyatt as they surveyed the transformed property. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the farmyard was finally emptying as the last volunteers prepared to leave. These people don't even know us. Why would they give so much? Because it's not about us. Wyatt's voice was thoughtful. It's about what we represent. A family that refused to break. A woman who chose love over convenience. A community that finally found the courage to stand together. He turned to face her, and something burned in his blue eyes. You started something, Evelyn. Something bigger than either of us could have imagined. I didn't start anything. I couldn't leave. I couldn't abandon those children. That's exactly what I mean. Wyatt reached out and took her hands. You made a choice. A simple choice, really, to stay when it would have been easier to leave. But that choice rippled outward, touching everyone it reached. Mrs. Patterson, Dr. Hartley, all these people. He gestured at the departing wagons. They saw your courage, and it awakened their own. Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes. I'm not courageous. I'm just stubborn. Sometimes that's the same thing. They stood together in the fading light, hands intertwined, watching the last rays of sun disappear behind the hills. What happens now? Evelyn asked. Now we wait. The marshal should arrive in a few days. He'll take statements, gather evidence, decide whether to press charges against Briggs. Wyatt's expression darkened. Briggs won't go down without a fight. He'll hire the best lawyers, spread more lies, try every trick in the book. But with Burke and the others in custody, with witnesses willing to testify, I think we have a real chance. And if we don't, if Briggs somehow weasels out of it, then we fight again. As many times as it takes. Wyatt squeezed her hands. But I don't think it will come to that. Briggs' power was built on fear. Tonight, we proved that his threats are hollow. The people of this valley aren't afraid of him anymore. Because of what happened here. Because of what you made happen. Wyatt's voice was soft. You're remarkable, Evelyn Hart. I hope you know that. Evelyn looked up at him. This scarred, complicated man who had ridden out of the past to help a family that barely knew him, who had fought beside her, believed in her, supported her through the darkest days of her life. So are you, she said quietly. For a moment, neither of them moved. The air between them was charged with something unspoken, something that had been building for months. Then Wyatt raised her hands to his lips and kissed them gently. Whatever comes next, he said, we face it together. Together, Evelyn agreed. And as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, she felt for the first time in longer than she could remember, truly at peace. The days that followed were a blur of activity and anticipation. The federal marshal arrived 3 days after the failed raid, a tall, stern-faced man named Marcus Cole, who listened to their story with careful attention and asked probing questions. He interviewed Burke and the other prisoners, took statements from Mrs. Patterson and Dr. Hartley and a dozen other witnesses, and examined the evidence with meticulous care. Briggs predictably denied everything. He claimed the raid was a misunderstanding, that his men had been acting without his authority, that he was the victim of a conspiracy orchestrated by jealous rivals. He hired expensive lawyers from San Francisco who filed motions and objections and tried every legal maneuver to delay the proceedings. But it wasn't enough. Burke, faced with the prospect of spending years in a federal prison, broke down and confessed everything. He named names, described meetings, produced documents that Briggs had carelessly left in his possession. By the time the lawyers arrived, the case against Briggs was ironclad. The trial was held in the county courthouse, a modest wooden building that was packed to overflowing with spectators. Evelyn testified, describing Briggs' threats and intimidation. Wyatt testified, recounting the raid and the violence that had been unleashed. Mrs. Patterson testified. Mrs. Chen testified. Dr. Hartley testified. One by one, the ordinary people of the valley stood up and told their stories, building a damning portrait of corruption and abuse. Briggs sat through it all with a face like stone, his piggy eyes darting from witness to witness, his meaty hands clenched on the table before him, but his composure cracked when the verdict was read. Guilty on all counts: conspiracy, fraud, attempted arson, assault with intent to cause bodily harm. The judge sentenced him to 15 years in federal prison. As the bailiffs led Briggs away in chains, he turned and fixed Evelyn with a look of pure hatred. "This isn't over," he snarled. "You think you've won? I have friends. I have resources. That's enough," Marshal Cole said, shoving Briggs toward the door. "You've said quite enough, Mr. Briggs." Evelyn watched him go, her heart pounding. She knew the threat wasn't empty. Men like Briggs had long memories and longer grudges. But for now, at least, he was gone. The valley was free. The celebration that night was the largest the valley had ever seen. Every family that had contributed to the fight came to the Miller farm, bringing food and drink and music. Lanterns were strung from the trees, tables were set up in the yard, and for the first time in what felt like forever, there was nothing but joy. The children danced and played, their laughter ringing through the cool evening air. Ruth held Hope up so she could see the lights, and the baby giggled with delight. The twins raced around the yard with the other children, their fears forgotten. Micah showed off his toy horse to anyone who would look, and Sadie had abandoned her thumb entirely, too busy stuffing her face with cake. Jonas stood apart, watching it all with a strange expression, wonder, maybe, or disbelief. "You all right?" Evelyn asked, coming to stand beside him. "I keep expecting to wake up," he said quietly, "to find out this is all a dream, and we're still back where we started. Hungry, afraid, alone. It's not a dream, Jonas. This is real. All of it. I know." He turned to look at her, and she saw tears glistening in his eyes. "I know it's real. That's what scares me." "Why?" "Because real things can be taken away." His voice broke. I've lost so much already, Miss Evelyn. My ma, my pa, everything I thought was certain. What if I lose this too? Evelyn put her arm around his thin shoulders and pulled him close. I can't promise you that nothing bad will ever happen again, she said honestly. Life doesn't work that way. But I can promise you this. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. This family, our family, we're stronger than we were. We've proven that. And no matter what the future holds, that strength will carry us through. Jonas was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. You really believe that? I do. Evelyn smiled and ruffled his hair. Now go join your brothers and sisters. There's cake, and I'm told the Patterson boy has been asking about you. Jonas grinned, a real grin, the grin of a child who was finally allowing himself to be a child again. He ran off to join the others, and Evelyn watched him go, her heart full. She felt Wyatt's presence before she saw him. He came to stand beside her, his shoulder brushing against hers. Beautiful night, he said. Beautiful everything. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the celebration unfold. The music swelled, a fiddle and a guitar playing a lively tune, and couples began to dance. You know, Wyatt said after a moment, I've been thinking. About what? About what I said, that night on the porch, before the raid. He turned to face her, his blue eyes intense. I told you there was something I wanted to ask you, if we survived. Evelyn's heart stuttered. I remember. Well, we survived. Wyatt took a deep breath. And I think it's time I asked. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. In the lantern light, Evelyn could see it was a ring, a simple band of gold worn smooth by time. It was my mother's, Wyatt said quietly. She gave it to my father when they married, and he kept it with him until the day he died. Thomas had it for a while, but he gave it back to me before I left. Told me to give it to the woman I loved when I found her. He paused, his scarred face vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. I found her, Evelyn. I found you. Evelyn felt tears streaming down her face. Wyatt, I know it's sudden. I know we haven't known each other that long, and I know I'm not an easy man to love. But I love you, Evelyn Hart. I love your strength and your stubbornness and your fierce, unwavering heart. I love the way you look at those children, like they're the most precious things in the world. I love, his voice cracked. I love everything about you, and I'm begging, will you marry me? The world seemed to hold its breath. The music faded, the laughter dimmed, and there was nothing but Wyatt and Evelyn standing together under the stars. Evelyn reached out and took the ring from his trembling fingers. She turned it over in her hand, feeling its weight, its history, its promise. Then she looked up at Wyatt, this man who had been broken and remade, who had wandered and returned, who had finally found his way home. Yes, she said. Wyatt's face transformed. The years seemed to fall away from him, the pain and regret dissolving into pure, radiant joy. Yes? He repeated as if he couldn't quite believe it. Yes? Evelyn laughed through her tears. Yes, Wyatt Miller, I will marry you. He swept her into his arms and kissed her, a kiss that held months of longing, years of waiting, a lifetime of hope. Around them, the crowd erupted into cheers and applause, the music swelling triumphantly. The children came running, surrounding them in a tangle of arms and legs and joyful shouts. Ruth was crying, Jonas was grinning, the twins were jumping up and down. Micah was waving his toy horse in celebration. Sadie was tugging at Evelyn's skirt, and Hope was cooing in Ruth's arms, her bright eyes taking in everything. Does this mean you're going to be our mother? Sadie asked, her voice high with excitement. For real and forever? Evelyn knelt down and gathered the little girl into her arms. For real and forever, she said. And as the celebration swirled around them, as the music played and the lanterns glowed and the stars wheeled overhead, Evelyn Hart looked at the family she had found, the family she had chosen, and felt her heart overflow with love. She had come west to marry a stranger. Instead, she had found something far more precious. She had found home. The morning after the celebration, Evelyn woke to find the farmhouse transformed. Sunlight streamed through windows that no longer had cracks or gaps. pooling in golden rectangles on floors that had been scrubbed and polished until they gleamed. The walls stood straight and true, patched and reinforced by the dozens of hands that had worked through the previous days. And on her finger, catching the light, the simple gold band that Wyatt had placed there the night before. She lay still for a moment, listening to the sounds of the house awakening around her. The twins were arguing about something in the next room, their voices more playful than angry. Ruth was singing softly as she fed Hope, an old lullaby that Evelyn had taught her, one that her own mother had sung long ago. Somewhere outside she could hear the rhythmic thud of an axe, and she knew without looking that it was Wyatt, already at work despite the late night. This was her life now, her family, her home, her... She rose and dressed quickly, then made her way to the kitchen where Jonas was attempting to cook breakfast. The smell of burning bacon filled the air, and Jonas looked up guiltily as she entered. "I was trying to let you sleep in," he said, gesturing helplessly at the smoking pan. "You were up so late last night, and I thought, I appreciate the thought." Evelyn took the pan from him and scraped the blackened bacon onto a plate. "But maybe we should work on your cooking skills before you try this again." Jonas's face reddened. "Pa used to cook. Before Ma died. He was actually pretty good at it." "Then it's in your blood." Evelyn smiled and handed him a fresh slab of bacon. "Here, watch me this time, and I'll show you the trick." They worked side by side, Evelyn demonstrating while Jonas watched with intense concentration. It was a small thing, really, a cooking lesson on an ordinary morning, but to Evelyn it felt momentous. This was what family was supposed to be. Not just surviving together, but living together, learning together, growing together. By the time the bacon was properly cooked and the eggs were scrambled, the rest of the children had gathered around the table. The twins jostled for position, Sadie demanded to sit next to Evelyn, and Micah was telling an elaborate story about his toy horse's adventures during the celebration. Ruth settled Hope into a makeshift high chair and began feeding her small bites of soft food. "Where's Wyatt?" Peter asked, looking around. "Outside, working," Evelyn replied. "Someone should go fetch him for breakfast." "I'll go." Sadie jumped up from her seat and ran for the door before anyone could stop her. Evelyn watched her go, her heart swelling. A year ago, less than a year ago, this child had been terrified of everyone and everything, clinging to her siblings like a drowning person clutching driftwood. Now she was running eagerly toward the man who had become her uncle, her protector, her father in all but name. The transformation was remarkable. And it wasn't just Sadie. All the children had changed, blossoming under the care and stability that Evelyn and Wyatt had provided. Ruth no longer carried the weight of the world on her thin shoulders. She was learning to be a child again, to play and laugh and dream. The twins had stopped clinging to each other in fear. They were confident now, secure in the knowledge that they would never be separated. Micah had emerged from his fantasy world, engaging with reality instead of hiding from it. And Jonas was becoming a man, but the right kind of man. Strong, but kind. Responsible, but not burdened. The son his father would have been proud of. The door burst open and Sadie came running back in, dragging Wyatt by the hand. "He was chopping wood again," she announced. "I told him breakfast was ready, and he had to come right now." Wyatt allowed himself to be pulled to the table, his scarred face creased with amusement. He caught Evelyn's eye and smiled, a private smile, full of warmth and promise. "Sleep well?" he asked, settling into the chair beside her. "Better than I have in months." "Must be the company." "Must be." They ate together, the 9 of them crowded around a table that was really too small for so many people. But no one complained. No one wanted to be anywhere else. After breakfast, as the children scattered to their various chores and activities, Wyatt pulled Evelyn aside. "I've been thinking about the wedding," he said. "Already? We only got engaged last night." "I know, but with everything that's happened, Brig, the trial, the community rallying around us, I thought maybe we should do it soon, before something else goes wrong." Evelyn laughed softly. Always the optimist. Always the realist. Wyatt's expression sobered. "Brig is in prison, but he's not powerless. He has friends, like he said, people who might try to cause trouble. If we're married, legally and officially, it strengthens your position. Our position makes it harder for anyone to challenge your right to this land or these children. Evelyn considered his words. He was right, of course. Marriage wasn't just about love, not out here on the frontier. It was about protection, about security, about creating a legal bond that couldn't be easily broken. But it was also about love. And looking at Wyatt, at his scarred, earnest face, at the hope burning in his blue eyes, Evelyn knew that love was the most important part. "All right," she said, "let's do it soon, but I want the children to be part of it, all of them. It's not just our wedding, it's a celebration of our family." Wyatt's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Whatever you want, you're the boss. Don't you forget it." He laughed and pulled her into his arms, holding her close. She could feel his heart beating against her chest, steady and strong. "I love you, Evelyn Hart," he murmured against her hair. "I love you too, Wyatt Miller." And in that moment, despite everything they had been through and everything that might still lie ahead, she knew that they were going to be all right. The weeks that followed were filled with preparation and anticipation. Word of the engagement spread quickly through the valley, and soon it seemed like everyone wanted to be part of the celebration. Mrs. Patterson took charge of the food, organizing a potluck feast that would feed half the county. Dr. Hartley offered to perform the ceremony, revealing that he had been ordained as a minister in his younger days. Sarah and some of the other young wives volunteered to help with decorations, while Mrs. Chen insisted on making Evelyn's wedding dress herself. "You made my daughter's dress," she said when Evelyn protested. "Now I make yours. It is only fair." The dress was beautiful, simple white cotton, like the one Evelyn had made for the Patterson girl, but with delicate embroidery along the hem and sleeves. Traditional Chinese patterns, Mrs. Chen explained, mixed with Western designs, a blend of cultures, just like their community. "It's perfect," Evelyn said, running her fingers over the intricate stitching. "Thank you." "Thank you," Mrs. Chen replied, "for giving us hope." The children threw themselves into the preparations with enthusiasm. Ruth appointed herself chief wedding planner, creating elaborate lists and schedules that she consulted constantly. The twins took charge of decorations, gathering wildflowers and stringing lanterns with single-minded determination. Micah worked on a special surprise that he refused to reveal, spending hours in the barn with scraps of wood and paint. Sadie practiced her flower girl duties until she could walk down an imaginary aisle without dropping a single petal. And Jonas took on the role of ring bearer, carrying Wyatt's mother's ring in a small velvet box that he guarded as carefully as a treasure. Only Hope seemed unaffected by the excitement. She was too young to understand what was happening, but she responded to the joy around her, giggling and babbling and reaching for anyone who came near. "She's going to be walking soon," Ruth observed one afternoon, watching as Hope pulled herself up on the edge of a chair. "Maybe even by the wedding." "That would be something," Evelyn agreed. "Hope taking her first steps while we take ours." "That's poetic," Ruth grinned. "You should put that in your vows." "Maybe I will." The date was set for the first Saturday in May, exactly 1 year after Evelyn had stepped off the train at Sutter's Creek Station. It seemed fitting, somehow. A full circle. An ending and a beginning wrapped together. As the day approached, Evelyn found herself reflecting on everything that had happened since that dusty afternoon when Jonas had met her on the platform with the news that would change her life. She had come west to marry a stranger. Instead, she had found a family in ruins, 7 children, orphaned and alone, on the brink of losing everything. She had made a choice that day. A simple choice, really, to stay when it would have been easier to leave, to fight when it would have been safer to surrender, to love when there was every reason to be afraid. And from that single choice, everything else had followed. The struggles and sacrifices, the setbacks and triumphs, the slow, painful process of building trust, of healing wounds, of becoming a family. It hadn't been easy, nothing worthwhile ever was. But looking at the life she had built, the children thriving, the farm prospering, the community united, Evelyn knew that every hardship had been worth it. She had come west looking for a purpose. She had found something far more precious. She had found herself. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, with not a cloud in the sky. The sun rose over the eastern hills like a blessing, painting the valley in shades of gold and pink. Evelyn woke early, too excited to sleep. She lay in bed for a while, listening to the birdsong outside her window, feeling the nervous flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with joy. Today, she would become Mrs. Wyatt Miller. Today, their family would be complete. She rose and dressed in her everyday clothes. The wedding dress would come later, and went downstairs to find the house already in chaos. Ruth was directing preparations with the intensity of a general commanding troops. The twins were carrying chairs outside, where the ceremony would be held under the big oak tree near Thomas and Mary's graves. Micah was putting the finishing touches on his secret project, which Evelyn still hadn't been allowed to see. Sadie was practicing with her flower basket, scattering petals across the floor and then carefully picking them up again. And Jonas was nowhere to be found. He went with Wyatt, Ruth explained when Evelyn asked. Something about a surprise. Men's business, Jonas said. Evelyn raised an eyebrow but didn't press. There had been a lot of secrets lately, and she suspected she would enjoy learning all of them. The guests began arriving mid-morning. Wagons and carriages and riders on horseback streamed up the road, filling the yard with people and noise and laughter. Mrs. Patterson was among the first, her wagon loaded with food that she immediately began organizing in the barn. Dr. Hartley came next, his Bible tucked under his arm, his nervous face creased with anticipation. Sarah and the other young wives brought armfuls of flowers, which they distributed throughout the property until the whole farm seemed to be blooming, and they kept coming. Farmers and ranchers, shopkeepers and craftsmen. The Chinese families from town dressed in their finest clothes, the Mexican vaqueros from the larger ranches, their silver conchos glinting in the sunlight, old-timers who had been in the valley since before anyone could remember, and newcomers who had arrived just last season. Rich and poor, young and old, they came together under the spring sky to celebrate a love that had brought them all together. By noon, the preparations were complete. The chairs were arranged in neat rows beneath the oak tree. The decorations were in place, garlands of flowers and ribbons fluttering in the gentle breeze. The food was ready, laid out on long tables in the barn, filling the air with mouth-watering aromas. And the guests were gathered, talking and laughing and waiting for the ceremony to begin. Evelyn stood in the small bedroom that had become hers, staring at her reflection in the cracked mirror. Mrs. Chen's dress fit perfectly, the white cotton bright against her tanned skin, the embroidered patterns catching the light. Her hair was pinned up in a simple style, with a few curls escaping to frame her face. She looked like a bride. She felt like a bride. A knock on the door made her turn. "It's time," Ruth said, peeking in. "Everyone's ready?" Evelyn took a deep breath. "Then let's not keep them waiting." She walked out of the house and into the sunshine, and the crowd turned to watch. There were gasps and murmurs of approval, smiles and tears, and hands clasped in joy. But Evelyn barely noticed. Her eyes were fixed on the figure standing beneath the oak tree. Wyatt. He was wearing a new suit. Where he had gotten it, she had no idea, and his usually unruly hair had been combed into something resembling order. His scarred face was shaved and clean, and in his hands he held a single wildflower, picked from the field that morning. But it was his eyes that captured her. Blue as the sky, deep as the ocean, filled with a love so profound it took her breath away. Sadie went first, scattering flower petals down the makeshift aisle with great ceremony. The twins followed, each carrying a ribbon-wrapped pole that they planted at the front of the assembly. Then came Ruth, holding Hope, who was dressed in a tiny white gown that made her look like a miniature angel. And finally, Jonas appeared at Evelyn's side. "I'm supposed to walk you down the aisle," he said, offering his arm, "since you don't have a father to do it." Evelyn felt tears spring to her eyes. "I would be honored." They walked together, the mail-order bride and the orphan boy, down the aisle lined with flowers and well-wishers. The crowd watched in reverent silence, their faces shining with emotion. When they reached the front, Jonas released her arm and stepped back. But before he did, he leaned in and whispered, "Thank you for everything." Then Evelyn was standing before Wyatt, with Dr. Hartley between them and the whole valley gathered at their backs. The oak tree spread its branches overhead, dappling them in shadow and light. And somewhere beneath the earth, Thomas and Mary Miller rested, watching over the family they had left behind. "Dearly beloved," Dr. Hartley began, his voice carrying across the assembly, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of Wyatt Miller and Evelyn Hart in holy matrimony. The words washed over Evelyn like a benediction. She heard them, absorbed them, let them become part of her. But mostly, she was aware of Wyatt's eyes, holding hers, steady and true. Marriage is not to be entered into lightly, Dr. Hartley continued, but reverently, deliberately, and in accordance with the purposes for which it was instituted. It is a union of hearts, of minds, of souls. A promise made not just between two people, but before God and community. He paused and looked at them both. Do you, Wyatt Miller, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do you part? Wyatt's voice was steady and clear. I do. And do you, Evelyn Hart, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish. Until death do you part? Evelyn looked into Wyatt's eyes, those blue eyes that had seen so much pain and loss and redemption, and felt her heart overflow with love. I do. Dr. Hartley smiled. The rings, please. Jonas stepped forward, holding the velvet box with trembling hands. He opened it to reveal 2 rings nestled inside, Wyatt's mother's ring, which Evelyn would wear, and a new band that Wyatt had somehow acquired for himself. They exchanged rings, each sliding the symbol of their commitment onto the other's finger. Wyatt's hands were shaking slightly, and Evelyn felt her own eyes misting over. By the power vested in me, Dr. Hartley said, his voice thick with emotion, I now pronounce you husband and wife. He paused, beaming. Wyatt, you may kiss your bride. Wyatt reached out and cupped her face in his rough, calloused hands. He looked at her for a long moment, as if memorizing every detail of this moment. I love you, he whispered. I love you too. And then he kissed her, gently at first, then with all the passion and promise of a lifetime together. The crowd erupted into cheers and applause, the sound washing over them like a wave. When they finally broke apart, Evelyn turned to face the assembled guests. They were all standing now, clapping and crying and laughing. Mrs. Patterson was dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Mrs. Chen was beaming with pride. Dr. Hartley was wiping his spectacles, which had become fogged with tears. And the children were surrounding them, pressing close, their faces shining with joy. Can we call you Ma now? Sadie asked, tugging at Evelyn's dress. For real and forever? Evelyn laughed through her tears and scooped the little girl into her arms. For real and forever. And Wyatt is our pa? Peter asked hopefully. Wyatt reached down and ruffled the boy's hair. If you'll have me, we'll have you, the twins shouted in unison. Ruth approached more slowly, hope balanced on her hip. The 9-year-old's face was serious, but her eyes were bright with emotion. I made a promise to my mother, she said quietly, before she died. I promised to take care of my brothers and sisters no matter what happened, to keep our family together. She paused, looking at Evelyn and Wyatt. I couldn't have done it alone. You saved us. Evelyn reached out and pulled Ruth into a one-armed embrace, careful not to crush hope between them. We saved each other. Jonas stood apart, watching the scene with an expression that was hard to read. He had grown so much in the past year, taller, stronger, more confident. But there was still a part of him that held back, that was afraid to fully trust, fully love. Evelyn released Ruth and walked over to him. She didn't speak, just opened her arms and waited. For a long moment, Jonas didn't move. Then, slowly, he stepped forward and let her embrace him. I'm proud of you, she whispered against his hair. So proud. I didn't do anything, he mumbled against her shoulder. You did everything. You held this family together when it would have been easier to fall apart. You protected your brothers and sisters. You trusted me, even when you had every reason not to. She pulled back and looked into his eyes. That's not nothing, Jonas. That's everything. Jonas's lower lip trembled, and for a moment he looked like the frightened little boy who had met her on the train platform a year ago. Then his face cracked into a smile, a real smile, full of hope and happiness. I guess we're a real family now, he said. We've always been a real family, Evelyn replied. Now we just have the papers to prove it. The celebration that followed was the grandest the valley had ever seen. Tables groaned under the weight of food, roasted meats and fresh bread, pies and cakes and preserves, dishes from a dozen different cultures brought together in a feast of abundance. Music filled the air, a mix of fiddles and guitars and instruments Evelyn didn't even recognize. People danced and laughed and told stories, celebrating not just the wedding, but the community they had become. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Micah finally revealed his secret project. He had been working on it for weeks, he explained, with help from some of the other men in the valley. It was a sign. A beautiful wooden sign painted in careful letters, "The Miller Family Farm Estancia, 1883." And beneath the name, carved into the wood with obvious care, were 8 smaller names: Wyatt, Evelyn, Jonas, Ruth, Peter, Paul, Micah, Sadie, Hope. Hope. "I know Hope can't read yet," Micah said anxiously, watching Evelyn's face for her reaction. "But I wanted her name to be there too, so she knows she belongs." Evelyn knelt down and pulled the boy into a fierce embrace. "It's perfect, Micah. Absolutely perfect." They hung the sign at the entrance to the property, where everyone who came up the road would see it. A declaration to the world that this was their home, their family, their future. As darkness fell and the lanterns were lit, Evelyn found herself standing alone at the edge of the celebration, looking out over the land that had become her world. The fields that she and Wyatt had worked to restore stretched out before her, no longer parched and dying, but green and full of promise. The creek that Brigg had coveted sparkled in the moonlight, its waters flowing freely through their property. The house that had once been a shelter was now a home, sturdy and warm and filled with love. And beneath the oak tree, Thomas and Mary Miller rested in peace, their children safe, their legacy secure. "Penny for your thoughts." Evelyn turned to find Wyatt approaching, 2 cups of cider in his hands. She took one gratefully and sipped the sweet liquid. "Just thinking about how much has changed," she said. "A year ago, I was on a train heading west to marry a stranger. I had no idea what I was getting into." "Regrets?" "Not a single one." She smiled and leaned against him. "This is exactly where I'm supposed to be." Wyatt wrapped his arm around her shoulders and pulled her close. Together, they looked out over the valley, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. "I've been thinking about the future," Wyatt said after a while. "About what comes next. And I think we should expand. Buy more land, plant more crops, maybe get some cattle, build something that will last." Evelyn considered his words. It was ambitious, more ambitious than she would have imagined possible just a few months ago. But looking at what they had already accomplished, she knew it was within their reach. "I think that's a wonderful idea," she said. "But first, I think we should focus on something even more important." "What's that?" "Making sure these children have the childhood they deserve." She turned to face him, her eyes serious. "They've been through so much, Wyatt. They've had to grow up too fast, carry burdens no child should carry. I want to give them back their innocence, as much as we can." Wyatt nodded slowly. "You're right. The farm can wait. The children come first." "Always." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the celebration wind down. One by one, the guests began to depart, calling out their congratulations and well wishes as they went. The children had long since fallen asleep, scattered throughout the house in various states of exhaustion. Only the adults remained, cleaning up and putting things away. Finally, when the last guest had gone and the last lantern had been extinguished, Wyatt and Evelyn walked back to the house together. It was quiet now, peaceful, filled with the soft sounds of sleeping children. "Mrs. Miller," Wyatt said, testing the words. "It sounds good." "It does," Evelyn agreed. "But I think I'll always be Miss Evelyn to the children." "Fair enough." He paused at the threshold, looking at her with an expression of wonder. "I never thought I'd have this. A home, a family, a future. I'd given up hope of ever finding it." "So had I," Evelyn admitted. "But then I stepped off a train in the middle of nowhere and found 7 children who needed me. And somehow in the process of saving them, I saved myself. We saved each other, Wyatt said, echoing the words she had spoken earlier. All of us. That's what family does. He took her hand and led her inside, into the home they had built together, into the life they would share from this day forward. The summer that followed was the happiest of Evelyn's life. The farm flourished under Wyatt's careful management. The fields produced abundant crops, corn and wheat and vegetables of every variety. The livestock that Mrs. Patterson had helped them acquire thrived in the mild weather, and the house, which had once been a crumbling shell, became a true home filled with laughter and love. The children blossomed too. Jonas threw himself into learning everything Wyatt could teach him about farming and ranching, determined to one day run the property himself. Ruth discovered a love of reading and spent hours poring over the books that Dr. Hartley loaned her. The twins became inseparable companions, their bond strengthened rather than strained by the hardships they had endured. Micah found his calling in woodworking, creating beautiful pieces that he sold at the general store for pocket money. Sadie lost her shyness entirely, becoming the most sociable child in the valley. And Hope, little Hope, took her first steps on a sunny afternoon in July, toddling across the porch into Evelyn's waiting arms. "She's walking!" Ruth shouted, summoning the rest of the family. "Hope's walking!" They gathered around, cheering and clapping as Hope took another tentative step, then another. She giggled at the attention, her bright eyes shining, completely unaware that she was doing something remarkable. Evelyn held her close, feeling the baby's heartbeat against her chest. "That's my girl," she whispered. "That's my brave, beautiful girl." Fall arrived in a blaze of color, the leaves turning gold and red and orange before drifting to the ground. The harvest was plentiful, more than enough to see them through the winter with plenty left over to sell. Wyatt made improvements to the barn and began planning an expansion of the house. More bedrooms, a proper kitchen, maybe even a parlor for receiving guests. "We're going to need the space," he said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "These children are getting bigger every day." "So are we," Evelyn replied, patting her stomach. Wyatt froze. His blue eyes went wide, and for a moment he couldn't seem to find words. "You mean—" "I mean—" Evelyn smiled, tears of joy streaming down her face. "We're going to have a baby, Wyatt. Our baby." Wyatt let out a whoop of joy that echoed across the valley. He swept Evelyn into his arms and spun her around, laughing and crying at the same time. "A baby!" he shouted. "We're having a baby!" The children came running, drawn by the commotion. When they learned the news, their reactions ranged from excitement to confusion to, in Sadie's case, a slight pout. "But I'm the baby," she protested. "You'll always be my baby," Evelyn assured her. "But now you get to be a big sister too. That's an important job." Sadie considered this for a moment, then her face brightened. "I can teach the baby things, like how to walk and talk and eat cake." "Essential skills," Wyatt agreed, grinning. The news spread quickly through the valley, and soon congratulations were pouring in from all directions. Mrs. Patterson arrived with a basket of baby clothes she had been saving for just such an occasion. Dr. Hartley offered his services as physician, promising to be there when the time came. Mrs. Chen began work on a tiny christening gown, her nimble fingers creating intricate patterns in silk and cotton. Winter arrived gently that year, with soft snows that blanketed the valley in white. The Miller family gathered around the fireplace on cold evenings, sharing stories and songs, playing games, and reading aloud. Hope was walking confidently now, toddling from person to person, demanding attention and affection in equal measure. And in Evelyn's belly, a new life was growing. A child conceived in love, destined to be born into a family that had been built from nothing but hope and determination. On Christmas Eve, as the snow fell softly outside the windows and the fire crackled in the hearth, Evelyn looked around at her family, at Wyatt reading a story to the younger children, at Jonas and Ruth debating the merits of different farming techniques, at the twins playing checkers by the fire, at Hope sleeping peacefully in her cradle, and felt her heart overflow with gratitude. "What are you thinking about?" Wyatt asked, looking up from his book. "Everything," Evelyn replied. "Nothing, just this. All of it. How lucky we are." "Lucky?" Wyatt raised an eyebrow. "After everything we've been through?" Because of everything we've been through. She moved to sit beside him, nestling against his warmth. A year and a half ago, I was alone in Boston, wondering if I would ever find a place where I belonged. These children were orphans, on the brink of losing everything. You were wandering the territories, running from your past. She paused, looking at the faces of their children now, all of them, gathered in the golden firelight. And now look at us. A family, a home, a future. Wyatt was silent for a moment, his arm tightening around her shoulders. You made this happen, he said quietly. All of it. If you hadn't stayed that first day, if you hadn't chosen to fight for these children, none of this would exist. We made it happen, Evelyn corrected. Together, that's the only way it works. Together, Wyatt agreed. He leaned down and kissed her forehead. I love you, Evelyn Miller. I love you too, Wyatt Miller. And as the snow fell and the fire burned and the children dreamed of Christmas morning, Evelyn closed her eyes and let herself believe what she had been afraid to believe for so long, that happily ever after was not just a fairy tale, that love, true love, was worth fighting for, and that family, real family, was not defined by blood, but by the choice to stay, to fight, to love, no matter what. She had come west to marry a stranger. Instead, she had found everything she had ever wanted. The baby was born in early spring, when the snow was melting and the first green shoots were pushing through the soil. It was a girl, a beautiful, healthy girl with her father's blue eyes and her mother's stubborn chin. They named her Mary, after the woman who had given birth to 7 children and loved them all with everything she had, the woman who had died bringing hope into the world, never knowing that her sacrifice would lead to the creation of something beautiful. Little Mary was welcomed into the family with open arms. The children doted on her, fighting over who got to hold her, who got to feed her, who got to rock her to sleep. Hope, now a toddler, seemed confused at first by this tiny creature who had taken her place as the youngest. But within days, she had become Mary's fiercest protector, glaring at anyone who came too close to her baby sister. She's going to be trouble, Wyatt observed, watching Hope stand guard over Mary's cradle. Like mother, like daughter, Evelyn replied, smiling. The years that followed were good years. Hard sometimes. Life on the frontier was never easy, but good. The farm prospered. The family grew. Jonas became a young man, tall and strong, with his father's work ethic and his mother's wisdom. Ruth blossomed into a beautiful young woman, with suitors lining up at the door, much to Wyatt's dismay. The twins went off to school in town, eventually pursuing careers in law and medicine. Micah became a master craftsman, his furniture sought after throughout the territory. Sadie married a young rancher from the next valley and started a family of her own. Hope grew into a fierce, independent spirit, determined to make her mark on the world. And little Mary became the heart of the family, the one who held them all together with her kindness and her grace. Thomas and Mary Miller would have been proud. Evelyn was certain of it. On the 10th anniversary of their wedding, Evelyn and Wyatt stood beneath the oak tree where they had been married, looking out over the land they had fought so hard to save. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, and the air was sweet with the scent of wildflowers. Do you ever think about what would have happened, Wyatt asked, if you had gotten back on that train? Evelyn considered the question. It was one she had asked herself many times over the years. Sometimes, she admitted. But then I look at our children, our grandchildren, everything we've built, and I can't imagine any other life. Neither can I. Wyatt took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. You saved me, Evelyn. You know that, right? Not just from Brig, not just from my past. You saved me from myself. You saved me too, Evelyn replied. You showed me that it was possible to start over, to build something new from the ashes of the old. They stood together in the fading light, 2 people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a family and a legacy that would endure for generations. I love you, Wyatt said, the same words he had spoken every day for 10 years. I love you too, Evelyn replied, the same words she would speak every day for the rest of her life. Behind them, the house glowed with warmth and light. The sounds of laughter and conversation drifted through the open windows, children playing, adults talking, a baby crying softly before being soothed. The sounds of a family. Their family. Evelyn Hart, Evelyn Miller, had come west to marry a stranger. Instead, she had found something far more precious. She had found home. She had found love. She had found purpose. She had found everything. And as the stars emerged in the darkening sky, she knew with absolute certainty that this was exactly where she was supposed to be. Always. Forever. Home.